Hey there, welcome to Selenium Web Driver tutorial by Simplilearn. My name is Anagha and today in this video we'll be talking about the Selenium Web Driver basics. What is that you should be expecting from this video? Let's see what is Selenium. Whenever we are learning about any tool, it's good to know a little bit brief history of it. So we will look into how Selenium has evolved over years to become the most popular web application automation tool and why use WebDriver. And then we will understand what is Selenium Driver. While we learn this, I will also be touching upon some drawbacks of manual testing and how automation helps. And then a deep dive into architecture of WebDriver. As you know, every automation tool has its own advantages and limitations. So we will be understanding the limitations of Selenium WebDriver and how we work around this. And then I will demonstrate the WebDriver in action, for which I will use a simple web application use case to automate. So let's get started. So before we talk about Selenium, let's understand a few drawbacks of manual testing. Let's take an example of a very simple use case. As a user, I want to log in to my web application using username and password. A very simple use case, and it's a very common use case for any kind of web application you're working. So as a tester, what do? I need to write multiple test cases to test this use case. So I can use multiple data sets like valid credentials, invalid credentials, null values, and so on to test this particular use case. And then what you do, you start executing the test cases one by one. You find bugs, then your developers fixes them, and then you will need to rerun all the test cases again and again until all the bugs for this use case are fixed and your application is ready to ship. Now look into this. Now this brings us to the first demerit of the manual testing, which is what? If one has to run test cases with 100 transactions and repeat them again and again, this is going to be a very time-consuming process and very boring. Also, it is more error-prone since it's done manually and human mistakes are bound to happen. The third challenge is the scope of manual testing itself is very limited. For example, say regression testing. Ideally, you would want to run all the test cases which you have written, but since it's a manual process, this is going to be very tedious to do. And also, you would not have all the luxury of time to execute all test cases. So what do? You start picking up those test cases which are very important to be run. And that way, you are kind of limiting the scope of your testing. Also, working with large amount of data manually is going to be impractical. What about performance testing? You want to collect metrics on various performance measures as a part of your performance testing. You want to simulate multiple loads on your application under test, and all these things manually it is very difficult to perform and it's not feasible also. And to submit all this, creating manual test reports after running all the tests. Who wants to really do that? And again, another level of challenge here is, say if you're working on an agile model where code is being churned out by developers, the testers are building their test cases, executing them as and when the builds are available to them. This happens iteratively, and hence you will need to run all those test cases which you have written multiple times during your development cycle. And doing this manually definitely is going to be very tedious and boring. And is this effective of doing it? No. So what do? We automate it. So this tells us why we want to automate. 1, for faster execution, 2, to be less error prone, 3, to help frequent execution of our tests. So there were many tools available in the market for automation. One such tool was Selenium, and that brings us to the slide, Advent of Selenium. So much before Selenium, there were various tools in the market like RFT, QTP, just to name a few popular ones. So Selenium was introduced by a gentleman called Jason Huggins way back in 2004. He was an engineer at ThoughtWorks. He was kind of working on a web application which needed frequent testing, and he realized the inefficiency in doing manual testing of his application repeatedly. So what he did was he wrote a JavaScript program that automatically controlled the browser actions, and then he named that as JavaScript Test Runner. He made this open source, which was later renamed as Selenium Core, and this is how the Selenium came into existence. So with this brief history of Selenium, let's understand what is Selenium and what are its main features. Selenium is the most popular and widely used automation tool for automating web applications. It enables us to test web application on different kind of browsers like Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Opera, and so on. And also they introduced support for Edge browser after Microsoft introduced it. Selenium is a set of tools and libraries to facilitate automation of web application. It is not a single tool. It has multiple components, and those we will be seeing in some time. All these tools together help us test the web application. So Selenium is open source and it is platform independent. This is the biggest reason why people are preferring this tool, because it is free of cost. QTP and RFT, which I just talked about, are a chargeable one. Selenium scripts can run on any platform because Selenium is primarily developed in JavaScript. So it is platform independent. Well, as you know, it's common for manual testers not to have in-depth programming background. So Selenium has a record and replay back tool called the Selenium Ide, which can be used to create a set of actions as a script and to replay that script. But this is mainly used for demo purpose. Why? Because Selenium is such a powerful tool that you should be able to take advantage of all its features and not just be with a record and replay tool, right? So that way there are a lot of record and replay tool anyway available in the market. The Selenium provides support for different programming language: Java, Python, C#, Ruby, PHP, and so on. You can write your test scripts in any language you prefer or you like. And again, as I said, one need not really know in-depth or advanced knowledge of these languages. You would still be able to write the Selenium scripts with a basic knowledge of this programming language. And also Selenium supports various operating systems. You can run Selenium test on Windows, Mac, or Linux, or even say if you have a Ubuntu machine, you can always run your Selenium test on Ubuntu machines. So you can run the test on any platform of your choice. Okay, so let's go now a little more deeper into Selenium. So I said that Selenium is not a single tool, but it is a suite of tools, right? So now let's look at what are those major components which comprises of the Selenium suite. First one is the Selenium Ide. So Selenium Ide is the most simplest tool in the whole suite of the Selenium. It is nothing but it's an integrated development environment. Earlier, this IDE was simply a Firefox extension and it offered a record and playback functionality. It was a very simple and easy to use. And as I said, mainly this is used for prototyping or for only the demo purposes, right? And not creating automation for your real-time projects because you know of its own limitation of being a simple record and replay tool. However, Selenium, what happened? Selenium IDE, it died with Firefox 55. So that means the support for IDE was stopped from Firefox 55 version. But the good news is very recently brand new Selenium IDE has been launched. And also what they have done is they have made this cross browser. That means you can install the extension on Chrome, the IDE extension on Chrome, or as an add-on on Firefox. So it is supported on both the browsers, Firefox and Chrome. Alright, so while we're talking of this IDE, let me also show you how the latest IDE on the Chrome looks. Okay, for that, let me go and launch my Chrome browser. So let me just open a new tab, and what I'll do is I'll search for Selenium IDE for Chrome download. Then I go to this website, and then you can see here Selenium IDE offered by seleniumhq.org. So what I simply need to do is, like you install any extension on your Chrome browsers, I just say add to Chrome, and this adds this extension on your Chrome browser. Now it has added. So Selenium IDE has been added to Chrome. Use this extension by clicking this icon. So can you see this icon here, which is Selenium IDE? That's it. So once you have installed this, you are free to start using the IDE on this Chrome browser. Similarly, you can do adding of this add-on, which is called as add-on on Firefox. So go to the Firefox browser, search for the Selenium IDE and just install that add-on. So let's get back to our presentation. So that's about the IDE. So what's our next component? Our next component is Selenium Rc, which is nothing but Selenium Remote Control. Selenium Rc is used to write web application tests in different programming languages. It interacts with the browser with the help of Rc server. It has an Rc server through which only it can interact with the web browsers. And how does it communicate? It uses a simple HTTP GET and POST request. And this is what was called as Selenium 1.0 version. But it got deprecated in 2.0 version and it was completely removed in 3.0 and was replaced with something called as Web Driver. So we will be talking in detail about why this happened, what were the drawbacks of Rc which led to replacing with the Web Driver. So now that brings us to the third component, which is the Selenium Web Driver. This is the most important component. It is just a programming interface to create and execute our test cases. Of course, it's a successor of Rc because there were certain drawbacks which I just mentioned, and we will be going in detail of what it were. So WebDriver, what the major difference what we see with the WebDriver is the architecture of the WebDriver is much simpler than Rc for the reason that WebDriver interacts with the browser directly, unlike your Rc where it needs an Rc server to interact with the browser. So this gave a lot of advantage and edge over the Rc. the fourth component, Selenium Grid. Selenium Grid is used to run multiple test scripts on multiple machines at the same time. With Selenium Driver, you can only do the sequential execution. However, in real-time environment, you know that there is always a need to run tests on distributed environment. For example, say you have a web application and say you have automated around hundreds or thousands of test cases and you need to run them as a regression suite. And also one of the asks is that you need to run this on multiple browsers and multiple OS. Why? Since you have automated them and your application supports multiple browsers and OS. Now imagine the time taken to run these 1,000 test cases sequentially with the WebDriver. Right? It's going to take quite a bit of time. So what you need is to run this parallel on multiple machines, matrixed across the browsers and operating system, and that is where the grid helps you in achieving that. So grid has this hub and node concept and it helps in achieving the parallel execution which I just talked about. So you can check out our detailed video on Selenium Grid on Simplilearn. Alright, so now we talked about the components of the Selenium. So let's look at the different versions it evolved into. So when I talked about RC, I mentioned that this was Selenium 1 version. So now let's understand how this evolved over years and what it offers today. So when Jason Huggins introduced Selenium, the tool was called JavaScript program. He called it as JavaScript test runner. It had one major issue. Now that is something called as same origin policy. So what is the same origin policy? It says that a JavaScript, when executed in a domain, can access web pages in that domain only, and it cannot access any web pages in another domain. I will repeat it. Same origin policies dictates that a JavaScript is executed in a domain can access web pages in that domain only, and it cannot access web pages in another domain. For example, say every web page in say google.com domain like search, email, drive can be accessible, but nothing outside of google.com, like say if you want to access a web page in say Amazon or Yahoo, is possible to access. Why? Because of the simple reason, which is a security reasons. Now to overcome this, Paul Homan created something called a Selenium remote control server. And why did he create that? He wanted to trick the browser in believing that the Selenium core through which you're going to run your scripts and your web application under test are in the same domain, with which you are able to run your test on your web application without having to get into this issue of same origin policy. So this is what was a version 1 of Selenium, and we called it as Selenium remote control. And then what happened in 2007, Simon Stewart, he invented this web driver. Now why did he invent this? Because the architecture of Selenium Rc was little complicated. Rc required a separate server to talk to your browsers. So what he did was he removed the requirement of having a separate server in the Rc, and this was the Selenium 2 version. Now since it was a transition phase, both the Selenium Rc and the WebDriver coexisted in Selenium 2, while the WebDriver was still under development. And then what happened in 3.0 Selenium is the Selenium core, which is the Rc, was completely deprecated and only the WebDriver was made available. So in this series of videos, we will be working with Selenium 3.0. And now Selenium 4 is already around the corner. So alpha is already released as of the day when this video was made, and I believe some of the features what the Selenium 4 is going to offer is they are moving towards W3C WebDriver standardization 1, and also there is going to be an improved IDE, the IDE which I just talked about, that it's a improved version of the previous IDE, and then an improved version of Selenium Grid also. So they might be doing a GUI based grid, right? So these are some of the major features expected in this version. Why Selenium WebDriver? So let's look at what led to replacement of Selenium Rc with this WebDriver. For that, first we need to understand the Selenium Rc and its shortcomings. As I said, Selenium Rc is a simple tool to write tests for web applications in various supported programming languages like Java, Python, Ruby, and C#. And this is the architecture of the Selenium Rc at a very high level. First, you need to write test scripts in any of the supported languages of your choice. So if you're more familiar with Java, you would be writing your test scripts, all your commands in the Java language. So before we start writing the test, one of the major required for the Rc to run is your Rc server. So first you need to start this Rc server before you run even a single line of code. And this Rc server is a separate application. And now what is the function of this Rc server? This Selenium server or the Rc server is responsible for receiving Selenium commands from your test script it interprets them and then reports the result back to your Selenium test script. Now, what are the Selenium commands? These commands are nothing but the commands written in your test script. These are called as Selenium command. That is what the Selenium server does. Now, after the Selenium server's function, let's look at how the browser interaction happens. The browser interaction happens through this RC server. This RC server uses a simple HTTP post and get request to communicate. And how does this communication happen? This RC server acts like a proxy. Say for example, your test scripts asks for launching a browser. This command from your test script goes to the server, and then this RC server launches the browser, injects its JavaScripts into the browser. Once this is done, all the subsequent calls, that is all the subsequent calls is all the rest of the commands which you have written after launching the browser, go to this RC server and then to the actual web server. So it routes, all the commands are getting routed through your RC server to your web browser. Upon receiving this instruction, so what does the code do? It executes these commands as the JavaScript commands on your browser. So once these are executed, the response from the browser or the results what you say are sent back to the RC server, and RC server is responsible for sending it back to your test script, and then the test results are displayed here. Now, if you see this complete cycle from starting your command from your test script, talking to the RC server, then RC server talks to the web browser, it injects the JavaScript here, runs your command, takes back the results, sends it to RC server, and then back to this test script. This whole cycle gets repeated for every command which is written in your test script. And this is how your test case gets executed. Alright. So now everything is fine. So great. We are enabled to run the scripts. We are able to launch the browser. We are able to execute all the commands. So what was the problem here? Why was still RC not good enough? For the reason why the RC was still not good enough was, one, the architecture of RC is very complicated because of that intermediate RC server to communicate with the browser. So there is no direct interaction with the browser. This RC server needs to be installed before running any test scripts. That means it has an additional setup, because that is RC server is a mediator between your Selenium commands and your browser. The execution of the commands takes very long time. It is very slow. Why? Because we saw that every command written in your test scripts needs to make a full trip from your test script to the RC server, to the core, to the browser, and then back, which makes your overall automation test execution very, very slow. So how does Selenium Web Driver now overcomes this? This is a simple architecture of Selenium Web Driver. Even in Web Driver, we have test scripts. We have a web browser and a web server. However, we do not have an additional server for communication like the RC server, which we saw in the Selenium Rc. This makes the architecture of WebDriver very simple. The Selenium WebDriver, that's one of the biggest advantages. The Selenium WebDriver does not use an additional server. Then secondly, it makes direct calls to your browser using your browser's native support automation. So since there is no intermediate server there, the browser is controlled directly from the operating system level itself. Now, due to this direct communication, the trips what we saw from the RC server to the browser and from the browser back to the RC server and to the test scripts, right? This was an indirect communication. Since this whole thing was avoided, the speed of test execution is much faster in RC. And this overall architecture of the WebDriver, if you see, it is much simpler than what the RC provides. So this was the major drawback from the RC, and this is where WebDriver replaced RC. Now, was that all because of the architecture? No, there were few other shortcomings with the RC. APIs in Selenium Rc. A single function has several commands. Redundant and confusing APIs. RC is less object-oriented API. Though there are good set of APIs to work with, they are pretty redundant and confusing. For example, how and when to use a type key or a type command. Another example is the mouse commands. Click or to use click at, or when to use mouse at or mouse down. So this was getting pretty confusing for the developers. And to top it all this, every browser interprets the command differently, which makes your test cases brittle when it has to work on the multiple browsers. Developers had a tough time making their scripts cross-browser, and they had to add browser-specific code. Whereas Selenium Driver comes with a set of more matured and simpler APIs, which are pretty straightforward to use. For example, a simple click to simulate a click action on any web element. Send keys, which simply means send the text to any web element on your web page. Scroll up or down on the web page, and so on. So we will see more of these commands when we actually start working with the WebDriver. Another difference is the browser support. Though both RC and WebDriver supports multiple browsers, RC does not have support for HTML unit, which is a headless browser, whereas the WebDriver supports testing on headless browser. Now, what is this headless browser? Headless browser is a browser which does not have a UI. It makes testing much faster because it does not need a real browser for testing. Now, to summarize all this, so if you look at the RC and the WebDriver comparison, which we talked about, RC is a complex architecture, whereas WebDriver has a simple architecture, for the main reason that WebDriver removed the need of having an intermediate server. RC, the execution of your test cases or your automation scripts, it's much slower than the WebDriver. RC requires a RC server to interact with the browser, whereas the Selenium WebDriver interacts with the browser directly using the WebDrivers. Also, we saw the APIs which RC provides, which are pretty confusing, and WebDrivers, we have much easier and easy to use APIs. No support for HTML unit browser, which is a headless browser. Selenium Driver also provides support for HTML unit browser. Now that we have understood what Selenium Rc is and why WebDriver replaced RC, let's go another level deeper into WebDriver. So what is Selenium WebDriver? We know that the WebDriver in its simplest term is a tool or a programming interface to create and execute test cases on a web application. It supports multiple browsers, i.e. Firefox, Chrome, Opera, Safari, Edge, and it also has support for headless browser. So we will know in some time what is a headless browser. Some of the features of WebDriver. So while RC was introduced in 2004, WebDriver got introduced by Simon Stewart in 2006. WebDriver can run on any platform of your choice, Linux, Windows, Mac, and even if you have a Ubuntu machine, you can run your Selenium WebDriver. And what is this actual WebDriver? Is it an IDE? No, it is simply a programming interface to run your test cases. And how does it work? The test cases are created and executed using web elements or the objects using web locators and WebDriver methods. So once we get into the demo or once you start understanding how Selenium works, you will understand what are these WebDriver methods and the locating techniques which are used to perform these actions on web element. Selenium WebDriver is pretty fast. Why? Since the WebDriver interacts directly with the browser and does not have an intermediate server like RC. Each browser with which you want to work with has its own driver on which your application runs. And this driver is responsible to make the browser understand the command which are being passed from your script, like a click of button or entering some text in any of the input fields. Through your scripts, you tell which browser you want to work with. Say you want to do all this action, say on the Chrome browser. If you want to work with Chrome browser, then the Chrome driver is responsible for interpreting your instructions from your test case and executing them on the web application, which is launched on Chrome browser only. So like RC, WebDriver also supports multi-programming languages in which you can write your test scripts, like the ones which are listed here. Also, WebDriver supports different frameworks like TestNG, JUnit, and NUnit. When we talk about the limitations of WebDriver, you will appreciate how this support for various frameworks and tools help in making the Selenium a complete automation solution for web application. Now let's try to know what is the architecture of Selenium WebDriver. WebDriver has 4 different components in it. One, we have the client libraries, or what is also called as language binding. Since I said Selenium supports multiple languages and you're free to use any of the supported languages to create your automation scripts, there are libraries available on Selenium website which you need to download and use them. Let me show you that. So let's go to my Chrome browser. So I have the Selenium HQ website already launched here. So guys, if you're working on Selenium, this website seleniumhq.org is going to be Bible. So everything and whatever you need to know and work with Selenium is available here. For now, we want to see the client libraries or the language binding. So for that, what you need to do is if you go to the download section here, can you see here the Selenium client and WebDriver language binding? So for each of the languages which is supported, you have a client library which you can download from here. So if you're working on Java, you need to download the Java libraries. If you're working on Python, you need to download the Python libraries, right? So these are called as language bindings. So Selenium provides a lot of APIs for us to interact with the browsers. And when we do the demo, I will be showing some of those APIs. Now, what are these APIs? These APIs are the REST APIs. REST is representational stateful APIs, and everything for Selenium happens through this REST calls. The second component is the JSON wire protocol. So what is JSON? JavaScript object notation, and it's a standard for exchanging data over the web. So for example, you want to launch a web application through your script. So what Selenium does is it creates a JSON payload and posts the request to the browser driver, right? And where are these browser drivers? These are here. Right, and what are these browser drivers? These are a driver specific to each browser. So if you see here, you can see drivers for Chrome, Firefox, Opera, Safari, and Edge, right? So we interact with the actual browsers here using these drivers. And how does this happen? This driver establishes connection with the real browser without revealing the internal logic of browser functionality, right? That's exactly the function of this browser driver. Now, what does that mean? Let's say we want to execute a test script. So what happens when the script is executed is an HTTP request is generated and sent to browser driver for each command in the script. And then the driver receives the request through this HTTP server and does all the execution on the actual browser. Once the execution is done, the execution results are just sent back over the same HTTP server to your test scripts. So this is the simplest form of the architecture of the Selenium Web Driver. Well, now as every tool has its own advantages and its limitations, so let's look at what Selenium Web Driver limitations are. Cannot test mobile applications, requires framework like APM. Selenium is for automating web application. It cannot handle mobile. Right? Mobile applications are different and they have its own set of automation tools. However, what Selenium provides is the support for integrating this APM tool. APM tool is one of the popular tool for mobile application automation, right? So it provides a support for integrating APM tool. So using APM and Selenium, you can still achieve mobile application automation. Now, when do you usually use this? In cases where, say, your application under test is also supported on mobile devices. So that means you need a mechanism to run your test cases on your web browser as well as your mobile browsers, right? And this is how you achieve it using Selenium. When we talked about components of Selenium, I said that a WebDriver can achieve only sequential execution. But in real time, we know that we just cannot live with this. We need to have a parallel execution on multiple machines and on multiple processes. So this limitation of WebDriver is replaced by having the grid, which helps us in achieve the parallel execution. And do check out our video on more details on Selenium Grid. Selenium WebDriver has limited reporting capability. It can help create basic reports, but definitely we need more, especially when we are working on a big project. We need good reports to be created. So what it does is we have a support for multiple tools like TestNG, ReportNG, and even the extent reports, which you can integrate with Selenium and generate beautiful reports. Isn't it really powerful? Alright, there's another challenge what we have. These are amongst few of the challenges what I have put across here. There are other challenges also, but always there is a workaround to get through those challenges. So another challenge which we have mentioned here is Selenium is not very good with image testing, especially designed for web application automation. But then we have other tools which can be used along with Selenium to achieve any kind of image testing you want to do, like AutoIt and Securely. So same way, the way it provides a mechanism to integrate APM, so Selenium also provides a way for integrating AutoIt and the Securely tools. So if you look at all this, Selenium still provides a complete solution for our automation need. And that's the beauty of Selenium that makes it most powerful tool today for automation. Okay, so let's look at WebDriver in action. So before we do that, let's understand some of the basic browser commands and functions that we will be using in our demo today. The get commands. So there are 6 get commands to perform various actions on the browser. Driver.get. This is used to launch any website application. It takes a string argument and this needs to be a fully formed URL which you want to launch. Driver.getTitle. So this method fetches the title of the web page which you're working with. So for example, let's go to eBay. So if you just hover your mouse here, can you see the text there? Electronics, cars, fashion, collectibles, coupons and more, eBay. So this is nothing but title of this current page. And this command helps us to get the title. Get current URL. So to get the URL of any page is when you want to use this command. So this will be used especially when you're working with multiple web pages and you want to say print whatever the current URL you're working on the console. Get page source. This method dumps the complete HTML page source on your console. Actually, this is not really much used unless you really need to look at anything in your HTML pages. And then there are two more get commands related to Windows handles. These are used for handling multiple tabs and multiple windows on the browser. Now, we will not be dealing with this in today's demo. However, if you want to know the details of this command, these are available in our video tutorials for these commands. The next set of commands are the navigational commands. So these are self-explanatory and basically are used to navigate between the multiple pages of your web application. The first one, the driver.navigate.to, is very similar to driver.get. So both does the same function. And then you have navigate.back, navigate.forward, and navigate.refresh. So this is used for refreshing your browser page. And then there are two commands, browser commands, which we use. One is the driver.close. So this closes the current browser window. So if you have got multiple tabs open in the window and you want to close a particular tab, so that is when you use driver.close. And driver.quit, what it does, it quits the entire browser session. Then there are few other commands, and some of the commands are listed here. However, if you see, there is a huge list of commands available in Selenium, and since we'll be using just a few of them in today's demo, I have listed here. So let's just understand these very basic commands which we will be using. Driver.findElement. Now, when you want to work with any application, what is that you need to do? You need to perform actions on the elements of the web page, and these are called as web elements. For example, let's go to our ebay.in. So on this website, say you want to search for JBL speakers. And what do you do when you want to search for this? You would identify the search box and you will enter the text JBL speakers, right? And then you go ahead and click on the search button. So this is the set of operations which you will do. Now for us to write this, and this is exactly what you need to do through your commands. For us to really write this text as JBL speakers, I need to know what this particular element is. Okay, so this particular input box is my web element which I need to identify. Similarly, if I want to click on the search button, I need to identify what this button is. And that's exactly is done by using driver.findElement. Selenium has multiple ways of finding these elements. It has 8 element locating techniques. And our future videos on Selenium do cover these 8 element locating techniques very much in detail. So for us, right now we will be using couple of them. So one is with ID and one is with a link text. The next one, the send keys. So as the name indicates, it is used to send a certain text to any web element you have identified or you want to work with. Like in this example, as I said, since we want to search for JBL speakers, right? I would be basically sending the text JBL speakers to this web element using send keys. Click. So after entering the text, what we need to do, I said, we need to click on the search button. So for all such actions, we have methods defined in Selenium. And one of them is this click. What this does is it just clicks on the web element or the button which we want to work with. So now with these basic commands, let's go ahead and start writing our code for our test case. So what is the test case we are going to write today? So this is my use case today. So use case 1, as a user, I want to log into eBay application, search for JBL speakers, and then I want to check the today's deal. So there is something called as the day's deal. We will go and click on that and see what are the deals available. I have another use case here. What says is, from this website, from wherever we are, right, navigate to the Simplilearn website and navigate back to the ebay.in. So this, using this use case 2, what I want to show you is how do we use the navigational commands. And my third use case is, from the ebay.in, I want to print the page title and close the browser. So with this, we are trying to demonstrate at least few commands from each of the categories which we talked about. So I will be using Eclipse for writing our test scripts. And if you want to know how to get started with Selenium, how do we install Selenium, you can refer to our videos on installation of Selenium by Simplilearn. Okay, let me go to my Eclipse. So in Eclipse, what I have done is I have already created a project called Selenium Demo. And in this project, I have gone ahead and created a Java class in which we would be writing our test case. So the Java class which I have created is ebaysearch.java. And also what I have done is, if you look at few import statements here, I have imported all the required Selenium jars here. So if you look here in the referenced libraries, the way after we work with Java here, right? So Java is the prereq for your Eclipse. So you already have the Java libraries available here. So what I need to do is I also need to import the Selenium jar files, and this is the list of Selenium jar files which you will need to work with the Selenium, and this I've already imported for you. Then another thing what I do as following a best practice is, instead of writing all my code under this main function here, what I do is I create methods for each of the use case or the test case which I'm writing. So same thing, I'm going to do that today for all the use cases which we have taken for this demo. Now let's get started. So what is the first thing which we need to do? The first thing what we need to do is you need to declare your WebDriver. So which I've already done here. I've said WebDriver driver. And then I need to launch the browser before even I go into eBay.in and start performing the other test. Now for me to launch browser, this is one method which I've already written here. So let me walk you through this. So there are multiple steps we need to follow for launching the browser. The first thing is set system property. So let's understand this particular command here, the one which I have highlighted. So this is used to set the property for your Gecko driver. Now what is a Gecko driver? If you remember, while we are talking of WebDriver architecture, I said for whichever browser you want to work with, you need to tell the WebDriver as which browser is what you're going to test with. And in my case here, I'm going to be using Firefox browser. And also if you remember, while explaining the architecture, I said every browser has its own driver which you need to download and install. And where is this driver? Let's go ahead and see that on the seleniumhq.org. So let me go to my Chrome browser. I already have a seleniumhq.org website open here. Now on this website, in the download section, if you go down, you can see something called as third-party drivers, binding and plugins. And here you would see a list of all browsers: Gecko driver, Chrome, Opera, Edge, right, and HTML unit, which is headless browser. So all these browsers which Selenium supports listed. And for each of this browser, we have a driver associated with it, which we can download. So if I want a Gecko driver, what I need to do is I need to click on this latest link. This will take me to the latest web driver which is available. So depending on the operating system which you're using, right now I'm using a Mac, so I've already downloaded it. So once you download, you need to place it in a particular directory. Okay, so let's go back to this. And now if you see this path here, what I'm highlighting, this is where I have kept my Gecko driver. So this Gecko driver, what you see is my executable. So if you're using a Windows machine, it will be geckodriver.exe. So this is the driver which we'll be working with. Now coming back to the system.set property. This particular method or this particular command is used to set your driver property. It is a key value pair and you will need to know which keys depending on which browsers you're working with. Since I'm working on the Firefox browser, the key which I need to set is the WebDriver gecko.driver. If I'm using Chrome, what I simply do is I have a key called Chrome and then I would set this path to Chrome driver, and this is exactly you need to do. So for you to even before launch the browser, you need to do this set property. So let me change this back to Gecko. So now we are clear till here. Now what is the next command which we need to after setting the property is after setting the property, you have to instantiate the WebDriver, which is done by using this particular command, driver is equal to new Firefox driver. So once you do this, your browser is going to get launched. Then once your browser is launched, what is the next step you do? You would be launching the application on which you want to perform your test. And that is done by using the command which we just saw now, driver.get. Now since I'm going to be working with ebay.in, I have just said driver.get and the URL, fully formed URL. So this particular method is going to help me launch the Firefox browser and also launch the eBay application. Now advantage of using methods like this is you can reuse these methods in every test case which you're going to write, or you can make a common function of this and just call this function in any of your test cases. Now for me to call this method, what am I going to do? I'm going to create an object of this class. Let's do that. Object is equal to new, done, and then I need to call this method obj.launch browser. Good so far? Alright. So now let's get to the first use case. So let's go back to our presentation and see what was our first use case. Our first use case was that we want to launch the eBay application, which we have already done in the launch browser method, and then we want to search for JBL speakers. Now for that, what we will do, let me create a method here. So I will call this method, I'll say public void, say search product. That's my method name. So I have created a method called search product. Now what I need to do is I need to search for JBL speakers. So for that, let me go to my Firefox browser and I need to first identify the search box element. So for identifying what I do, I go to this website, I go to this element and then I say inspect element. So now I know that there is already an ID which is unique to this particular web element available. So I'm going to make use of this ID. I need to go to my Eclipse. So now here I'm going to use the find element method. So for that I'll say driver.findElement, I'll say by.id and it's a string argument, I'll just copy the ID which I copied from the Firefox browser. And then what is the operation I need to do here? I need to send keys. And what is the keys I need to send? The product which I'm searching for. I'm searching for, say, JBL speakers. Done. So with this command, what it will do is it will enter the text JBL speakers in the search box. After doing this, I need to click on the search button. Now, similarly, I need to identify what is the web element search. For this, again, I already have a unique ID here, which I'm just going to simply copy from here and use it in the find elements. So same thing I will do, driver.findElement by.id, and this is the ID of the button. And here, what is my operation? I need to click. Done. Good so far. Now, other thing what we also need to understand here is, so what happens sometimes, depending on the websites, some websites are pretty slow even while loading the page, and some are pretty fast. Now, for the Selenium to work without having to fail or without having to create exception of not finding the elements, it is good to use certain waits. So why we need to use waits is, say for example, when after entering the JBL speakers and after clicking the button, it's going to take a while for it to search for JBL speakers and give us that web page with the list of JBL speakers. And even before we start doing the first command, like searching, once we load the page, it takes time for the complete page to get loaded. Okay, so Selenium provides a lot of synchronization commands, right? And it's a very big topic on its own, which needs to be used, especially when you're working with any kind of website. Okay, so there is since it's a separate topic, there's a separate video which will help you understand how to use the synchronization. Now, for the demo purpose, we have certain wait commands which can be used, and that is exactly which I'm going to use here. So that is called as thread.sleep. So what this does is, say I'm going to give 2000 here. What this does is, this script waits for 2 seconds, right, after the previous command is executed, and then it executes your next command, which is our find element. Now this is showing us an exception because it wants us to add a exception here, add throws declaration, which is interrupted exception. Okay, we need to do this. So once we are done, okay, we have done the click. So let's see what is the first use case which we had. Have we covered everything in the first use case? Okay, we said log into eBay, done, search for JBL speakers, and then I want to check on the days deal. Okay, we need to do this also. So for that, again, what we need to do is we need to go and identify. So what I will do, I'll use the inspector here and look for this daily deals. Now this is a link text, it's an anchor tag. So what I will do, I'll copy this link text, daily deals. I'll go to my Eclipse. Now after this, I will give another thread.sleep of say 2 seconds. That should be more than enough. And then I'll say driver.findElement. Now this time I will be using something called as link text. And here as an argument, as a parameter, I'm going to paste the daily deals which I just copied. And then what do I need to do on this web element? I just need to do a click operation. Done. So the complete first use case we have covered. So what we will do is, let's go ahead and execute this first use case. Now I have launched the browser here. I also need to call this method, which is search product. Now again here, since we are doing that add throw declaration on the method, we also need to do it for the main function. Exception added. I'll save this, and for me to run this, what I do is I simply right click on that and I say run as Java application. Now we see that our Firefox browser is launched, the eBay application is also launched, and JBL speakers entered and search clicked. So we have a list of JBL speakers here. And now as per our test case, it has to go on the daily deals, which it just did. Great. Alright, so we have our first use case working. So right now I have not used the browser.close. So what I will do is I'll just manually go and close this browser. So we are done with our first use case. Now let's move to our second use case. So what second use case says is, from wherever you are, right now we are on the ebay.in, navigate to Simplilearn website and then navigate back to ebay.in. So let's see how to handle that. So let's go back to my Eclipse here. Now let's create another method. Instead of saying test case 2 or use case 2, we'll give a more meaningful name. I'll say navigate, since we are exercising the navigate commands here. I'll just use this method. Now, so we have done the click. So I need a quick thread.sleep here because I want it to wait so that we can see. Otherwise, it's going to be so fast, we will not be able to see what are the operations it did. So I'll just add a thread.sleep before we start navigating to the new website. Okay, thread.sleep, and I guess 2 seconds should be good enough even here. So same thing, we need to add the exception. So add throws declaration and interrupted exception. All right, done. So now what we need to do is we need to navigate to the Simplilearn.com. So for that, first I need a fully formed URL of the website which I want to launch. Okay, so let me go to, and here instead of ebay.in, I would say let's search for Simplilearn. I have it here, and I just pick this from here, https www.simplilearn.com. So let me go to my Eclipse, and here we saw another command like get. We said navigate.to. So let's use the same command. So I'll say driver.navigate.to, and I'm going to use to URL because, or you can just use a string because this is going to be a string variable. Now what does this command do? This will simply navigate to the URL which we have specified here. Now here again I'm going to give a quick sleep here so that we are able to see the website before we navigate back to the ebay.in. So I'll use a thread.sleep. This time probably I'll give a 3-second wait. Then what does our use case say? Let's go back to use case once and check. And it says and navigate back to ebay.in. So that means I need to use a driver.navigate. Can you see the list of commands here which provide, which the navigate class provides? Okay, and the back is what we need to use so that it comes back to the ebay.in. Done? So far so good. Now let's do one thing before even we go to the use case 3. Let's execute our test case till here. So what I'll do, I'll save this program, and after search product I will call navigate method. Okay, I will save this and then right click, run as Java application. So our Firefox is getting launched. It has launched. The eBay application is on. So it's going to first find the JBL speakers, click on the search. We have a list of JBL speakers. Then it will click on the daily deals. Yes, it is doing that. We got the deals of the day. Yes, it is now navigating to Simplilearn.com. Now after 3 seconds, it should take me back to the ebay.in. Okay, cool. So this was the last page where we left before we navigated to Simplilearn. Right? And that is where we have come back using the back command. So now let me close this again because I have still not incorporated the driver.close. Now let's look at the use case 3. Now use case 3 says once you're back to ebay.in, print the page title and then close the browser. Cool, very simple. So we'll go back to Eclipse. Probably in the same method, what I can do is once I'm back here, I will say, so I have to use driver.get title. That was a spelling mistake. Driver.get title. Okay, this is the method which we are going to use to get the title of the page. Now we also said that once we get the page title, we want to print it on the console. Now how do you print it on console? You just use a sysout statement. So instead of just writing this, what I will do is I'll directly write a sysout statement, system.out.println, and I'll write a text as the title of this page is, and then we will concatenate with driver.get title. As simple as that. And after I do this, I will simply call, it's actually, I want to call the driver.list, but it's always good to create a separate method. So I'll say public void close browser method. And here I'll simply say driver.quit. You can use close or you can use quit. So let me demonstrate how do we use quit here. Now I need to call the close browser. So simply what I'll do, I'll say obj.close browser method. Okay, so this completes our all 3 use cases. So now let's execute all these 3 use cases now. And we should be able to see the title of this page on the console. So same thing, what I do is right click, run as Java application. Okay, same thing, our eBay is launched now. Send keys the JBL speakers, click on search button, executed, and then it has to click on the daily deals. That it is done. Moves to Simplilearn website. Now it has to come back to ebay.in, and we should be able to see the close browser, which just happened at the snap of the finger, right? So now for us to know whether it really happened, what we have done is we have printed the page title. Okay, now can you see here? We have the complete page title printed here. All right, so let's go back. So let's look at what are the key takeaways from that. So in this overall video, we saw what was Selenium, what is Selenium Web Driver, what were the limitation of the remote control, which is Selenium Rc, how did WebDriver replaced it, and we went into learning the architecture of the Selenium WebDriver, which is very important for us to understand because we will be working with the WebDriver to create all our automation scripts. And then, as I said, every tool has its own limitation. We also talked about limitations at a very high level, and also as there are workarounds. And then I also demoed some of the browser APIs and their usages and some of the methods which we use with Selenium. This video focuses on teaching how to use Selenium IDE for creating automation scripts. What does this video cover? 1. A brief about Selenium and where the IDE actually fits in. Very recently, a new version of IDE has been launched, so we will look at what it has to offer. How does the record and replay tool work? And then let's understand the components of this IDE interface. We will work with few commonly used Selenium commands. And then, since we are using the new IDE, let's look at some of the key features of the Selenium IDE. And like every tool has its own limitations, we will also look at what are the limitations of Selenium IDE. So what is Selenium? So Selenium is an automated testing tool used to test web applications across various browsers. In my previous video where we have covered the complete basics of Selenium Web Driver, I have explained each and every components of the Selenium suite. So Selenium IDE is one of the components in the Selenium suite, right? And other components of the suite are Selenium Rc, Web Driver and Selenium Grid. So in this video, we will be looking in detail about how the Selenium IDE works. So what is Selenium Ide? Selenium Ide was developed way back in 2006. It was created to facilitate a simple record and replay of the test automation. So record and replay tools were pretty much in vogue during this time. And the main advantage of using such tool was an automation engineer was not really required to know any knowledge of programming. He could just use this record replay tool and create the automation. And this IDE was available as a Firefox extension. So for one to use it, you need to just go ahead and install the extension on Firefox and then use its recording and record the steps of your test execution. It is a very simple interface which helps in building the automation scripts. And how this works? You just need to start the recording on IDE, perform your test steps on the browser, and these steps gets recorded in the script. And then what you could do is you could export the script into say a WebDriver or a JUnit, Ruby or any JavaScripts, and then you can use it. Now, however, the record and replay tool is not a very powerful automation tool, and hence this IDE is mainly used for prototyping or you could say demo purpose. Now, since Selenium WebDriver itself offers such powerful capability of creating robust test scripts, IDE more or less remains as a prototyping tool only. So in short, as I said, IDE is a part of overall Selenium set of tools and mainly developed to speed up the creation of test cases. And what is the other advantage of that? One need not really have any programming knowledge to use this tool. And mainly it is used for writing some quick tests for demo purposes. Advancements with the new Selenium IDE. Back in 2017, Selenium IDE development was completely stopped. The last supported Firefox version where this IDE was available as a plugin was Firefox 54. And from 55 onwards, the complete integration point was removed or it was completely broken. However, recently, Applied Tools helped revamp much of the Selenium IDE code. They basically rewrote the whole IDE code and then now they have released a new version under the Apache 2.0 license and it is completely managed by the Selenium community. Now let's look at some of the features of this. Now traditionally the Selenium IDE was only a Firefox plugin. However, the new IDE supports both the browsers, the Chrome and the Firefox, and thus making it cross-browser. So before even we start looking at the other features of the Selenium IDE, I would like to show you how do we install this Firefox plugin or the Chrome extension. So for that, let me go to my Chrome browser. So in the Chrome browser, what I'll simply do is I'll search for Selenium IDE for Chrome. So then let's go to this chrome.google.com and here you will see it as an extension Selenium IDE. So go ahead, click on Add to Chrome. So this will add this extension to your Chrome browser. So now it says Selenium IDE has been added to the Chrome. So how do you make out if it is added? So you can see this particular icon here which says Selenium IDE. So this is the way you can go ahead and install it on the Chrome. Now on the Firefox, I have already installed it since we want to use the Firefox as a browser for all the demos in this video. So here again you can see the Selenium IDE. So if I click on this IDE, it is going to open a window for me, and the first window when it opens, it says either open a new project or open an existing project, or simply you can start recording a new test case, in which case it creates a default project for you first. So what I will do is I'll say open an existing project, and I've already got a project created. So let me go to my folder where I have this project. So I have this project created and I've opened it. I also have a simple test case written. Now what this test case does is, let me show you here. It simply goes to google.com and then here what I'm doing is I'm searching for Selenium HQ documentation, and then I click on this site which says seleniumhq.org and docs. So which should take us to this particular website where the documentation is available. So this is a simple script which I have tried to write it in this IDE. So let's keep both these windows open and let's go back to our presentation to see the first feature of this Selenium IDE. The first feature, what it says is improved locator functionality. What are locators? So these are nothing but the techniques used for locating your web elements on your website. Now for example, in our example here, now the type here, the type which says name equal to Q. So name equal to Q is a locator. Now this is a locator of what? Initially, if you saw, I went to google.com and this is the search button which I used, right? The search text, and then I said enter. So this is nothing but your web element for which the locator is name equal to Q. Now what happens in IDE is when you record it, it has taken the attribute name and it has recognized this particular web element using this attribute. However, it also has a feature wherein it also records its multiple locators available for that particular web element. For example, it also has a CSS locator, it has an XPath locator. Now, how does it help here? Say for example, tomorrow this particular attribute name, right, for the search box, if it changes, then what IDE does is when you execute this test script, it falls back on your other locators mentioned here in this dropdown. And then if none of these locators work, only then the test case is going to go and fail, not otherwise. So how does this help? This helps to make the test cases more robust. Otherwise, having just one locator, there is high possibility the test case might break or become pretty brittle as and when the web elements change their attributes. So this is what the locating techniques are. And that is how they have improved the locator techniques in the functionality in the new IDE. Now what's the next one? Parallel execution is possible with this new IDE. So the first IDE, the traditional one, the parallel execution was not possible. However, this is a new feature which has been added. So we will be looking in detail how to work with this parallel execution later in this video. Next is you can add control statements in your scripts. Now what are these control statements? Like if else, while loops, for each loops, and even the switch case. The earlier IDE also had this provision, but you had to install a plugin to enable the use of this control statements. And now with this new IDE, it is available out of box. Automatically waits for page to load. In any automation, synchronization between your application under test and your automation scripts is very important. Your script should not run faster than your application. Otherwise, your scripts are going to start failing. So it is necessary to have enough load times on the operations of your web elements and also enough load times on your page. Now this load time ensures that all the elements of your web pages and the page itself is loaded completely before even a single line of script is run. This new IDE takes care of providing that enough wait time. And also you have a global set speed option which you can use to control your execution of your scripts. So that is something which I will show you now. So if I go back to this, so can you see this clock icon here? So it says test execution speed. So what you can do is, right now it is set to the fastest, so I can actually control the execution speed here. So right now I've just kept it a little slower. So let's see how our test scripts run. So you'll be able to see a remarkable difference when I slow down the complete speed of this. So now do you see how slow it is? Initially when I ran it, you were unable to see what I entered in the search field of the Google, right? So now it's really taking time on each of the steps which we have mentioned there. So now it is executed successfully. So next it supports embedded code. You can run a simple JavaScript from your test script, right? And how do you run that? By using a simple command called as execute. Now let's see how do we do that. So let's take the same example here. Now, after clicking this, okay, so this is our IDE. So what I will do is I'll first execute this test case, and then in the end, where I will show you how do we add a simple JavaScript and do some function. So let me get the speed back to a little normal because we do not want to waste too much time. So I'll just play the script once. So now we are in the Selenium documentation. Now if you look at this page, this is a pretty long one. So now I'm going to write a simple JavaScript wherein I scroll down towards the end of this page. That's all I'm going to do. Now for me to do that, what I can do is in my script itself, I can just add another line here. Okay, here I will say add a new command. Here I'll say execute script, which is my command. And what is the script which I want to execute? It's a Java script which I'm going to write here. I'll say window dot scroll by, and I'm just going to mention some coordinates here. Start from 0 and I'll say 1500. Okay, this is all my code is. And now I'll simply run this test again. Let's see what happens. So it's going to the documentation now. It's clicked on the link. Okay, it's moved down. Do you see this? Initially, it was right here on the top of the page. And once the JavaScript was executed, it brought me somewhere to the middle of this page. Okay? That is how you can insert snippets of JavaScript, and it has to be in context with your currently selected window. Okay? And that's how you run it. Alright, let's go back to our PPT again. What's the next feature? So every IDE has a debugger which allows step execution, adding of breakpoints. Now, apart from just having a breakpoints or adding the step execution, there is another feature which it provides called, I will show you that, which is called as pause on exception. So let's close this window and let's just keep this IDE window open here. Right? So can you see here pause button? It says pause on exception. So what it does is, if you enable this button, okay, and when you're running the script, so if at all there happens to be an exception in your script, it stops the execution at that particular exception for you. And we will see this in detail when we look at complete debugger for the IDE. Can be integrated in CI. Since you can execute scripts from command line, right? We also talked about the parallel execution, and you can also export the scripts to any of the programming language you want. So since you can do that, these scripts can be run from command line, and hence they can also be integrated with your Maven project, and through Jenkins you can run it, and that's how you achieve your CI. Working principle of Selenium Ide. Selenium Ide works on a very simple principle. One is the recording. It records user interactions with the browser, and which forms basically your IDE script. And using this IDE script, which is a recorded script, you execute the script and verify and monitor for its stability and success rate. And thirdly, what you can do is you can simply save your recorded script for your future runs or regression testing. And these scripts can be saved either in the form of an IDE project itself, or you can also export these test scripts into the form of a JavaScript or your Ruby scripts or even the WebDriver scripts. Now let's look at the components of this IDE interface itself. The first one is the menu bar. So let's go back to our IDE window. So here in the menu bar, what you can see is a project name. So either you can edit the project name here, or you can simply create a new project, open an existing project and save the current project. Okay, so these are all the options available. And since we have already created a project here, I will not be showing how to create a new project, so that we can do it little later. Now next one is the toolbar. So this is the toolbar what we have here for the IDE. Now there are multiple components in the toolbar. So let's see one by one. So it says run all test. Now if you have multiple test cases written, okay, so this is an option where all the tests can be run one after the other. This is to run your current test which the focus is on. So currently our focus is on search test. So if I click on this button, it is going to execute the search test for me. IDE has this debugger option where you can do a step execution, right? You can do step-by-step execution using this option. We'll see how to do that. So for example, let's say we start from here, okay, and I click on this. So what it does is basically it has just executed the first step for me. So let's keep this side by side so that we can observe the complete execution. Now if I go and press on this again, step over current command. So that is the next command it is going to execute. Now it says type into this. Alright, so now you can see this Selenium HQ documentation. Okay, then again I say step, send keys, which it said enter. And then it is going to click on that documentation, which it did. And now we have a script written which scrolls down on this particular page. So let's execute that, and that is what it is. So this is how the step execution happens. So let's close this window and let's come back to our IDE window. Then we have buttons here where you can say record or you can stop recording. Okay, then you can pause the execution, and then there are other options available for disabling breakpoints. So basically you can add breakpoints anywhere here. So for example, if I want to add a breakpoint on the click here, so what I have to just do is I have to just click here. So this adds a breakpoint. And if you want to remove all those breakpoints, you just say disable those breakpoints. So when you run the script, even though you have a breakpoint available here, for that particular run, your breakpoint will be disabled and your execution will not stop at this point. And let's enable them for now. And what we will do is we'll just run the script until there. So now it has stopped here at this click. Now from here, Either you can execute the rest of the test case by just clicking on this run button, or you can stop the execution. Okay, so for now what we'll do is we'll just stop the execution. So once you stop the execution, you will see that this is in red, which means that this particular line was not executed or it failed, either of the things, because you have aborted at this particular line. And the rest of the things what you see in green, it shows that all these test steps have been executed successfully. So what is our next component? Let's come back here. So we saw the menu bar here, we saw the toolbar, we saw start and stop of recording, address bar. Now what is this address bar? So this address bar is where you actually write your URL from where you want to start your recording. And as and when you start writing more and more test cases, it keeps a complete history of all the websites which you're working on. Next, then we have a test script editor box, which is this. So let me just minimize this a little bit. Okay, this is nothing but your test script editor box, and this is where all your script steps are, all your interactions are recorded. Now there are 4 attributes in this. Okay, can you see a command? Now command is nothing but the actual operation or the action performed on your web element. So there are multiple actions you can perform. Like in this case, we have something called as open, we have got type, we have got send keys, and we have got click. So these are all the Selenium commands which are available. And then we have something called as target. Now this target is nothing but the web element on which you want to perform the action. And now this target, as I said earlier also, it is identified by multiple locating techniques. And if you click on any of this, like we looked at the name here, now similarly the website which we are clicking on, if you look at it, there are multiple locating techniques which are available here. So the one right now which is being used is the CSS identifier. You can also have XPath here, which is a relative XPath. So these are all the locating techniques, and this is which is applied on the target. Value. So value is an optional field. So you can send any value to your web element. For example, in this case, where we are sending the value, which is our text, which is Selenium HQ.documentation. So this is the value which I want to send it to as a search text to my google.com. And then comment or the description. So here you can mention any description about that particular line which you have recorded. For example, I can say here, sending search text to the Google search input box, and this gets recorded here against your instruction. Now let's look at the test case pane. Now test case pane, that is here. So if you look here, now it contains all the test cases which you have recorded. Now there are multiple things here. One is your tests. Say I can always go ahead and create another, say test case 2. Okay, I can add a few more test case here, test case 3. So all these test cases are here. Now I can also have a test suite. Now there is already a test suite which I have created, which is called the Google Suite. And now if I want to add test cases under this, what I can do is I can just say add tests. And now I can add any of these tests which I just created under this test suite. So say I've selected the first 3 and I've added it. So we have test suite, we have tests here, and then executing. So executing is basically, it shows the particular test case which is currently in the execution mode. So whichever test case we run, you will see all the test cases listed here which have been executed at that point of time. That is your test case pane. And then we have test log and reference. This is a very important window which you need to be aware of. Now here, this is a running log. So as and when you are going to run your test cases, the every instruction, the every test step, as and when it runs, it is going to log here, whether it has passed, whether it has failed, whether the command was executed properly or not. And this is how it records it. It's a running log. Also, there is something called as reference tab. Now, for example, just go ahead and let's select one of this command which you have written here, which is send keys. Now, this reference, it will show you the complete description of the command and how to use that command. So say for click, it says reference is click locator, clicks on the target element. It gives you a complete detail of what exactly the command does. Let's create a test script now for say Amazon.in. So let's go back to our IDE. What we will do is we'll create a completely new project. So I'll click on the create new project. Are you sure you would like to without saving it? Yes, proceed further. And let's give the name as Amazon project. Now in this new project, what I will do is I'll say I'll add a test, and my test name is search iPhone. Now basically what is the use case which I'm going to automate is I will launch Amazon.in and I will search for iPhones. And once I get the iPhones, let's verify the title of that particular page. Now just the simple steps, we'll go ahead and do that. So for that, first what I need to do is I need to enter the URL. Now this URL needs to be a fully formed URL. So for that, what I will do, I'll first launch amazon.in on any browser. I'll just copy this URL and I can close this browser window, and in this URL address space I would say amazon.in and I'll say enter. And now I would click on this recording button which says start recording. So once I do this, what it does is it launches the web page with amazon.in, and from there I can start recording my script. So let's do that. I'll say record it. So let me just keep this window side by side so that you can see what is happening on the ID window here. Now here what I will do is I'll click on the search and I'll say iPhone and I will click on the search button, and here I will also click on this bestseller. Once I'm in this window, I'll say right click. Now when your Selenium Ide is in the recording mode, you will get this option here which says Selenium Ide, and there are a lot of options here which you can select. Now for this particular moment, what I want to do is I want to assert the title. So I'll just put an assertion point here for assert title, and then I will close my browser window. Now let's see what are all the commands which it has recorded. Let's go one by one. Right, so it is done. It is opening the amazon.in. It is setting the window size. Fine. It clicked on the to search window button, and then iPhone is what we are searching, and then it said submit it. It's basically clicking on that button, and then we said we also want to open the bestseller link, and here is our assert title. Right, so it's a very simple test. So let's go ahead and execute this. Now since I also have a close command here, this script is going to execute so fast that you will not be able to make out all the steps what we have written. So for that, what I will do is I will comment out this line. Now how do you comment out any command here? Just select the command, and can you see here enable and disable command? Just click on it. So now your command is disabled. Also what I will do is I will reduce the execution speed so that you should be able to see exactly what is happening. So let's go ahead and execute this test first. So I'll say run current test. Okay, I have not stopped the recording. So that is the first thing. After closing the window, I also need to click on the stop recording. Now your script is ready to be executed. So let's go and run the current script. Again, I'll just bring this side by side so that you can see each of these commands being executed here. Okay, it has searched for the iPhone. It's clicked on the bestsellers, and it has done the title assertion. Now if you look at the log here, as I said, see every step as in when it was executed, it has been logged here. Can you see here? And it puts an OK, and it color coded in green, which says that this particular command was executed successfully. Now let's go ahead. Now this is what we did by simply recording all the steps from the browser. Now one more thing what we will do is say I want to continue recording here, right? I've not completed my test case. So what you can still do here is you can come towards the end of the script and press on record button again, and then you can continue recording from here. Now say for example, after the bestsellers what we have got, say I want to click on say hot releases, hot new releases. So I do that. Okay, it says it has recorded the click, and then I want to stop the recording. Just the another step is what I wanted to add. Now it has stopped the recording. So can you see this new line which has got added? So that means you really need not restart recording all the steps again if you want to add something in the middle of your script. You can always go towards the end of the script or anywhere in between, and you can add more commands there, or you can record anywhere in between the script. And that is how this does. So let's go ahead and again execute this. Then I will show you another feature of this. Okay, it's done the title assertion now, and it has also clicked on hot new releases. Done. Now let's say for example, I need to add another command here. Now instead of going ahead and using this recording, what I will do is I'll manually add certain command here. Say for example, let's go to this Amazon website and say you want to click on this cart. So let me add a command manually here. So what is my command? My command is click. And then what is that I want to click? I need to identify that web element. For that, I can use this here which says select the target in the page. So I click on that and I simply select this target, which is my cart. And that is all I need to do. So my command is written there. So I'll just simply go ahead and execute this again. Let's see what happens. So let me close this window here. Okay, let's run this test cases. Bring this window to the side. So now you can see one by one the instructions being executed. Okay, the iPhone has been searched. The bestseller has been clicked, assert title. So it says your shopping cart is empty. So that means it is successfully able to click on the cart. So now with using ID, there are multiple things you can do. You can simply record your script while you are running your test case. You can add a command all by yourself. You can stop recording anywhere and again restart from the same point. Now we have our complete test script ready. Now let's go ahead and save this. So how do you save this? Simply go here and save your complete project. So all the projects from the ID are saved as .side file. So let's name this as Amazon project and I will save it. So if I show you in my Finder how it looks like, this is the project we created. So it always stores with the file extension .sid, right? That is Selenium Ide. Now, also I said you can export test cases into multiple format. So search iPhone is my test case. So what I can do is I can just say right click and I can say export. Now right now you can see only 3 options. It says Java JUnit, JavaScripts and Python. However, the older IDE had multiple options of export, which had even the WebDriver scripts and also the JavaScripts. This is still in works and they would be adding more support for other programming languages here. So, but for now, the only options what is available to us is Java JUnit, JavaScript and the Python. So let's go ahead and export this into Java JUnit. So it's just going to simply save it as .java file. So let me go here in the IDE test. I'll save this file. So if you go back to my Finder, you can find our search iPhone test.java. So you can open that Java file. You can see here. It's a simple JUnit test. It is exported into. So if you have an Eclipse IDE, you can use this test and execute it from your Eclipse IDE. Selenium commands. Selenium commands can be broadly classified into 3: action commands, accessors, and assertions. What are action commands? Action commands are the commands which interact directly with the web elements on your application. So let's look at what these commands are. So if we go back to our previous example where we had written a test script for Amazon.in. So if you look at all these things like open, set window size, click, type. So these are all nothing but called as action commands. And if you go here, you can see, let me do one thing. So let me just come to a blank line and now let's look at the list of commands. So you have a whole list of commands here listed in the alphabetical order. Like add selection, there are multiple assert commands which is made available to you, and then there are set of commands where you say click or click at a particular location, closing the browser, using a debugger command, double click, drag and drop, echo. I'll just explain how to use an echo command. So this is a command which is not used on your web element but something which you want to say display on your console. And then there are if-else statements which are used as commands here. Then you have something called as execute script for you to execute any say JavaScript or any different script which you want to execute from your test script here. And then you have few mouse commands here. Open, which is what we use for opening an URL, pause and so on. So there are multiple commands which you can look at and try to use these commands in your script. So these are all called as the action commands. So let's go ahead and use this echo command and see what it does. So now in the same script, what I will do is towards the end of the script, I'll just add this command. I'll say echo and say I want to just display a message saying that this is the end of the script execution. That is all I want to do. Now I'll just go ahead and run this, and what we want to observe here is how this particular message what we have given here is displayed on the console in the log. So now if you observe here, so go to this last statement what we have. So it says after clicking on the card, it said echo, this is the end of the script. So this is what we displayed and using the command echo. Okay, so this is how you can use the echo command. Another feature here, what you can do here is, now say for example, I just added a simple echo statement here. Now for me to execute that, what I did was I executed the complete script. You really need not do that always. Instead of that, what I can do is I can just come to this particular line. I can just say right click and I can say play from here. So what it does is from this point, it is going to play the script for me and not right from the beginning of the script. So I'll show you how. Now with this command, if you look here, say it started running the script here. It says running search iPhone. And then it executed only one command which says echo, this is the end of the script. So this is also possible to do with the ID. Accessors. Accessors are the Selenium commands that examine the state of an application and store the results in a variable. So these are those commands which allow the user to store say certain values into your user defined variables. And these stored values can be later on used either to create assertions or you can have some verification points created. So let's see some of the store commands in action. So I have few store commands here which I'll be demoing. So first one is a store. So simply using a store command, you can store any kind of user defined messages in a variable, and then after that you can either use it for displaying it on your console, or you can do some assertions with that. Similarly, store title. So you can store the title of any of the web page under test. Then store text. So store text is basically used to capture the text attribute of any web element on your web page and store it in a variable, use it as an assertion point. Store value. So store value again is used to store the value attribute of any web element. Like, so you have a lot of web elements on the web page, and say one of the attributes is what you want to do an assertion on. So what you can do is you can use the store value command here, get the value attribute of your web element and store it in a variable. So let's see all these commands in action. So let's go back to the same example. So we have this Amazon test script example. So what I'll do is say instead of using Amazon, let's do one thing. So let's create another test case itself. So I'll go here, I'll say add new test, and I will name this test as access a test. And we will use the same Amazon site here. I'll say click on start recording, keep this window side by side. So first we will look at store title. So simply what I need to do is go to this Amazon site which we have launched, right click on this, go to the Selenium Ide, and you have multiple options here. So go ahead and select store title. So once I click on that, it is going to ask me the variable name where I want to store the title of this page. So let's create a variable here. I'll say var title, and I'll say okay, done. Now come back to your IDE. Alright, so I will stop the execution here. Now I have this store title command. I created a variable called var title, and I'm storing the actual title into this variable. So let's also display this on our console. So I'll add a command here, echo, and in target, how do I use the variable now? This is the way to use it. I'll say $, and in flower braces, I will give the variable name which I have defined earlier. So it is var ITLE, title. Okay, so this is all my script is, where I'm storing the title of the web page and I'm displaying it in my console or the log. So now there are some extra commands which gets added here. Now because we are doing the recording on that, so whatever the mouse movements happen, it is going to record. We do not need this, so I will go ahead and delete this particular command. So let's close this window and execute this test first. So the script has executed successfully, but let's go and see whether did we get the title displayed on the console. Yes. So it did open the Amazon site. It has set the window size. It captured the title here in this line. And then after assigning it to the variable, we said echo and that variable name, and it is displayed as the title of the page. So now similarly, let's go ahead and let's see how do we use the store text command. Now for store text, I need an use case here. Say for example, what about this cart? Let's say we want to display the text of this particular element. Now the text of this element is cart. So now instead of again going and re-recording all the steps, I will simply manually add this command. So now after displaying the title, okay, so let's go ahead here and I will say store text. And in store text, I need to pick the text from this web element cart. So what I will do is I'll use this target, select target, and I will select this particular element which is cart. After this, I need to create a variable where it can be stored. So I'll say var cart text. Now similarly, I will also display it using echo command. Echo $ in the flower braces. I'll say var cart text. So let's execute this and then let's look at the other command. So I'll just say I'll close this window again, run this test. So now look at this log lines. So our last statements was storing the title and displaying the title. After that, we added store text. Okay, so here is the command. It said it is executed successfully. It was able to retrieve the text from the element cart, and the text retrieved was cart, and which is what got displayed with the echo statement on our console. So now let's move to our next store command, which is store value. Now as I said, store value, for us to use that particular web element should have the attribute value. So first let's examine which element we can take and display the value. Now on the same website, I have the search button. So I will right click on this and I say inspect element. Now look at all the attributes of this element. It is of type input, it has a class name, it is of type submit, and also it has this value attribute which is go. and this is exactly what I want to retrieve and print. So we will be using the search button. Now similarly, same thing what I will do here. I'll go ahead, add a command here. I'll say store value. Same way, I will select the target. I'll say select target from page. I will click on the search button. Alright, so here it has taken the target here. In the value, I will mention the variable name where I want to store the value. So I'll say var button and value, and similarly I will say echo and I will print the value of this variable, which is $var btn value. Let's go ahead and execute this. I'll say run current test. So it has taken the title, it has printed the value on the line 7. So it says store value on this particular element, and the value was stored in the variable var btn value. So that command was successful, and the value actually which was got stored and which we retrieved using echo statement was geogo, and that's exactly what we had here. If you want to check again, go here to inspect element, the one which is highlighted. So as we said, the value is go, and that's exactly got printed on our console. Now apart from this, I also said there is a simple command which is just store. So let's use that also. Now after all this, here I will say store, and say we want to just store a user message. I would say a target as all store commands demoed, and this message I will capture it in a variable, say var string, since it's just a text, and then like I did it in the others, var string, then I'll say echo and the variable name. So now if we close this, and one way to do it is execute the complete test, so which will execute all our store commands, and also the last line is this, the line number 9 in the log, which says the store command which we use to store the text, all store commands demoed, and that is also displayed using the echo. So all the store commands we have demoed successfully. Now let's close this window and go back to our presentation. So this is all about the accessor command. Now what do we have after accessor? So we have something called as assertions. Now what is an assert? So assertion is nothing but it verifies the current state of an application with an expected state. So this is something where you compare your actual result with the expected result. Now assertions are of 3 different types. One is assert, verify and wait for. Now what does assert does? When the assert command is executed and if it fails, right, the test stops immediately after this statement. So if you are asserting, say, a title of a page, and if you find that the title of page is not as expected, as soon as it finds that failure, your rest of the test is not going to run, and it's going to immediately stop the test, and also it is going to flag the test case as fail. What is verify? Verify is something where this Selenium Ide, it logs that particular assertion as fail. However, it would continue with the rest of the steps in the test case, and then at the end of it, your overall test case is flagged as fail. That is what verify does. So verify is called as soft assertion, whereas assert here is called as hard assertion. Why it is called hard assertion? Because as soon as an assert statement fails, the complete test execution stops at that statement. Whereas in soft assert, what happens is after the failure happens, the test continues with the rest of the steps and it completes its execution and then flags the test case as failure. And when is this usually used? In cases like, as the same example, say if you are asserting a title, you really do not want the test case execution to stop even if there is a failure. Why? Because none of your steps are going to be dependent on this assertion point. And this is where you will require a soft assert. Wait for. Wait for is something which waits for a certain condition to be true. After that, it proceeds to your further steps. So if the condition goes false here, for whatever, say if you are waiting for an element to appear on the web page, and if that element does not appear, the test fails. However, it carries forward and completes the test by executing the rest of the steps and then flags the complete test case as a failure, which will be something similar to a soft assert. So let's see all these things in action. Let's go back to our IDE. We will create another test case here. So I'll say assert test. Now for this, what's the example we can take? So first for assert title, let's do the assert title on Amazon itself, and let's change the same test case to verify and see how this test case behaves. Now for this, I will launch the recorder with the same amazon.in. Okay, my recorder is launched. Now simply I will go to this website and I'll say right click Selenium Ide and I'll say assert title. Then I will stop the recording. Now here I will remove this command which has got added, which I don't need. So this is my assert title. Now we have already seen assert title passing in couple of our other examples. Now I want to show you a failure on assert. So for that, what I will do, I will modify this actual title. So here in the last line, I'll just remove this Amazon.in. So now ideally this test case is going to fail for us because the title which it is expecting and what it is comparing against are not the same. First, let's execute this. Well, I also need to show some statements after this. So what I will do is, let's add few more statements here. So let me start the recording here again. Say after asserting the title, we want to go and click on this bestseller, and then I will close this. Now let's execute this. Stop the recording and execute this test. Now do you see this? Assert title is in red. That means it has failed the validation here. So you see here in the log, it says open the site done, set window size done. When it comes to assert title, it says actual value was something different and it did not match with what you are trying to look for. Assert test ended with one error. Now after this assert, please observe that there are no other statements which got executed. The test stopped right away after this failure. This is called as hard assert. Now let's go ahead and change this assert title to verify title. So simply what I will do, in the command itself, instead of assert, I'll say verify title. And now let's execute this and see what happens. Now let me close this window first and then I'll say run test. Running assert test, Amazon.in was opened, window size was set, verify title failed because the titles were different because we have modified that. However, do you see this fourth line being executed? Click on link test bestseller and click on close. Now since it was a very fast execution and I closed the browser, probably you were not able to see the bestsellers clicked here. That is fine, but in the log we can see here that the steps 4 and 5 got executed. Even after the title, verify title, step failed. And if you compare it with the previous example where assert title failed, the two lines after that, the line 4 where we are clicking on the bestseller and closing the browser are not getting executed. So this is the main difference between the verify title and the assert title. So now let's look at wait for. How do we use wait for? Now for wait for, I want to look at some kind of website where it would load an element dynamically after a while. So for that, I have a website here. Let's create a new test again. Let's go to the tests pane. I will say assertion test. And now let's go to a browser. We open a new window and there is a demo site which I want to use. So let me search for that and then I will use that URL. So I'll say internet. I'm going to use the dynamic loading. Do we have here? Yes, dynamic loading page, element rendered. Now, see if you look at this website, when I press on the start button, right, after a while, this hello world text is going to appear on this web page. So in our use case, what we will do, we will launch this website, we will click on the start button, and then we will put an assert on this text using wait for. Let's do that. So let's go here. Let me copy this. This is the one. Let me say Control C, and in my new test, I'll say Control V, and then I'll say start recording. So it's going to launch this. So let's close the previous windows. Now in this, I'm just going to click on start. So that is going to get recorded. Done. And now, while the recording is still on, I will add a command here for wait for. So I'll say wait for element visible. That is exactly what we are saying, right? So wait for is used for a condition and until that condition is true. So I am saying here, please wait for this particular element, which I'm going to give it in target, until it is visible. Now the target is, I'm just going to select the target from this web page itself. So I'll say select target and I'm going to select this particular text. Come back here to your ID. So wait for the element to be visible. What is the element to be visible? Is this hello world text. And then you need to give a value here. Now what is this value? Since we are using wait for, we need to mention a timeout. So we have to tell basically to ID that okay, wait for say 1 second, 2 seconds or 3 seconds, whatever it is required. And that timeout value needs to be mentioned here. So and this is in milliseconds. So what I will say is, I'll say, so let's fail this test case first. So I'll use a little lesser timeout. So I'll say 3000. So that is 3000 milliseconds, which is 3 seconds. That is it. And then we can say, so what we'll do here is we'll add an assert. So I will say assert text. Now what is the assert text I'm going to do? I need to look for the same element. So I'll simply say select target, this one. And what is that I'm going to assert with? I'm going to assert with the same text. So I'll just copy this text and I'll put it in the value. There's another way of doing that, which we have done it previously. So I can just go here, do a right click, go to Selenium Ide, and I can say assert text, which is basically going to give me the same command. So let me just go ahead and remove one of them. Either of them you can remove. Okay, so let's stop the recording. I will not close this browser because I want you to see how the dynamically loaded element behaves. And we'll go ahead and execute this. So I'll say stop recording and I'll say execute this test. Now it's here. All right, so it's waiting. Okay, it has failed. Now see this. So it says wait for element visible. After that, the value we have mentioned is 3000. That is wait for 3 seconds, which was not enough because and it failed with saying that unable to locate the element within the timeout period. Now let's go ahead and change it to a passing value. So I will say 10,000 here, which is 10 seconds. So let's close this. And let's again execute this. Bring this to a side so that we can see, okay, it is waiting on that wait for element. Now look at the problem here. What we have done is we have closed the website and after that we have added the assert text. So this is a mistake what we have done. And hence, though it has found that element here for wait for, what did it do? It went ahead and closed the window and after that it's definitely not going to find the assert text, right? So that's the mistake what we have done. So let's go ahead and debug this. So what we will do, after this wait for element, we want this assert to be put after that. We don't need this click content because this was an additional step which got added. Delete it and then close. Okay, fine. So now let's go ahead and rerun this. So we'll say run current test. I'll move this to a side. Okay, it's waiting. All right, done. So now it is able to do an assert text on this. Alright, so this is how you use the wait for. Key features of Selenium Ide. Let's look at the first feature, reusability of test scripts. So many of the test scripts have test steps that involves signing into an application or creating an account. Like for example, a login screen is a very key example in this case, where whenever you are testing your application, first you need to log in and then perform any other test. So now it's going to be a redundant or a waste of time to recreate the login steps again and again for each and every test case. So we do not want to definitely do that. So as we know, since a record and replay tool does not have enough capability of writing common test cases or common functions and calling those common functions like our regular Selenium Web Driver has. However, what Ide has done is it has given us a provision to run one script from another script. So what basically what we do here is, especially for a login, we write one test case which is going to log into your application and call this test case in the other test cases. So let's take a look at how this works. So for that, let's go to our Ide. So in this Ide, we'll do one thing. Let's go ahead and create a new project. So let's say login project. In this project, I will create a new test case. We'll call it as login test. They'll say add. Now in this login test, I need to give a URL. Now for this purpose, I will be using again a demo site. So first let me launch a demo site here, file new window, and I will say the demo site co.uk. Okay, this is a simple demo site which has a login functionality. Right, so here I will go to the login screen. Now this also allows me to add few users, and using the same users we can go ahead and do the login. Now coming back to our login page, so this is the URL which I need to launch, which is going to give us username and password we'll use to log in into this application. So give this URL here and say start recording. Move this window here for recording and this here. Now what is the first step we want to record? We want to come here, click on the username, and I'll say user1, okay, and I'll say password pwd1, and I will click on test login, and then what we will do is we will assert this text. So here I'll say right click, Selenium Ide, assert text. That's it. And then I will close the browser. Okay, this is all my test is. Now come back to your Ide. Let's see if there are any unnecessary commands which it has taken. Okay, click, type, all done. And now for the time being, I'm going to comment out this close command because I want the browser to be still open so that we can see the actual test execution properly till the end of the script. This is the login test case. Now simply if I run this, let's execute this. Let me execute this and show, stop the recording and execute this test case. So it typed user1, it typed pwd, which is my password here, and then clicked on the button, and then definitely it was a wrong password. So it gave me failed login. So this is passed. Fantastic. However, this is with one value I have used it, but this is a function which I want to use it every time. And also a probable use case I might have is that I might need to log in with a different user ID and password. And apart from that, even just to test this login test page, I would want to test with multiple user ID and password, like valid credentials and invalid credentials. Now for that purpose, what we will do is we will parameterize this name, that is user ID, and the password. And how do I parameterize it? Simply go here, instead of giving a hard-coded value here, what you can do is just say, use any variable name here and we'll define this variable somewhere else. So I'll say username, this is the variable. Similarly, for my password, in my value field, instead of a hard-coded value, I'll say $, and I will say password. Now I cannot run this program as it is because this variable is not defined in the login.test. What I will do now is I will create my actual test case. So I'll say here, I'll say invalid credential as my test case. And I'll say add. Now here is where I will assign values for my variable. Now which are those variables I need to use? Username and password. So I need to assign some value here and then call this function login test. So let's do that. In this video, previously we also saw how do we use user variables and how do we assign value by using the store command. So I'm going to say store and then my target is going to be the actual value. So user1, and where is that I'm going to pass this? To my variable username. So let's just check once if the variable name is username. Yes. All right, done. Now I have done the username. Now I need to pass the password. So I'll say store the actual password, which is pwd1 in my case. And what is the variable I need to use here? I have to use password because that's the variable which we have used in login test here. And then after that, I need to use a command which is called as run. Now what this run command does is run, and whatever target you give, which is basically your another test case, it is going to run the test case. Now in our case, our test is login test. This is all our test case is going to be. Okay, so what is that we do in this test case? We created a variable username and password and assigned the actual username and password. And then we are just calling this login test. And in this login test, this username and password will get passed, which will be user1 and pwd1, and then it will execute this test with the value which we have passed to this variable names. So now which test case we need to run? The invalid credential. So let's go ahead, close this window and execute this test. Executed. So now look at the log of this invalid credential test. See here, running login test called by invalid credential. Before that it said store this value, store user1 in the value username, that is your variable. This is this line, and then the password. Then it says run login test. So it called the login test functionality, and in the login test we have all this clicking on the password field, clicking on the username, and then asserting the text, and that's exactly what is done here. This is how you use it. So now let's write one more test here for the same login test. So let me add another test. I'll say valid credentials and I'll say add. Now same thing I will do here. I'll say command store. My target will be, now I'll say user3, value will be username, right? Okay. Now second command will be again storing. This time it is for the password. My password is pwd3 and the variable name is password. And same thing, I'll just call run and my login test. That's it. So now similarly, let's run this test and see what happens. Now this test is going to fail. Why? Let me close this window. I don't need this. Why did this test case fail? Because my assertion point, let's go to the tests, I'll show you. My assertion point in login test is look for failed login. However, we created a test case for valid credentials, right? Because our valid credentials said that the login was successful, which did not match with what we were asserting, which is fine, right? So we just wanted to see whether we can write a test case with valid credentials and invalid credentials. And this is how you do that, by passing the variables through your test case to your actual test case. The next feature is the debugger in the IDE. Like every other IDE offers a debugger functionality, so does Selenium Ide. So let's look at what are the different functions available for us in the debugging. So there are multiple functionalities which the Selenium IDE offers us. So one is called as the step execution. So for us to look at how each of these debugging techniques work, what I'll do is let's go ahead and create a new test script. So let's go to our IDE and I will create a new test case. So I'll say new test case. Let's use Facebook login this time. So I'll say FB login test, or we'll just say FB test. So now for this FB test, I would go ahead and use the Facebook login page. So I'll just copy this URL, paste it here, and then I will minimize this other Firefox window and I will launch the recorder now. So I'll click on start recording. Now let's keep this side by side. And what is it we are going to do here is, let's do a simple login functionality. So I'll just use some email ID here. So I'll say myuser@gmail.com. This is just a dummy user ID and password I'll use, and I'll say password as password1. Then I'll click on login button. Let's stop the recording here. So let's read the script once, whether it has got everything whatever we need. Okay, it has launched Facebook. It clicked on email ID. There's a double clicks here because I happen to click twice on the email ID field. So what I'll do, I'll remove one, we don't need it, and then I'm typing the keys, which is myuser.gmail, and then I'm clicking on the password field, typing the password and clicking on the login button. And then once I do that, okay, so I'm going to get this page as the password you have entered is incorrect. So let it be. So we will use the script until here and check out some of the login options. Okay, so we have completed writing of the script. Let me go ahead and close this window. Now, first thing what we will do is we'll just simply execute the script. So we have to just say run current test. So it's going to log in your Facebook. It'll enter myuser@gmail. It'll enter the password. It'll log in, and that's about it. So now your script is executed. Now let's go into the debug mode. As we said, there are multiple options for debugging. What is the first option? Let's see. So first option we have is something called as step execution. So what the step execution does is, from your script, you can execute all the steps one after the other. So you can basically control the execution of each step. And how you do that? What you have to do is just go and click anywhere. So let's start from the beginning. Let's close this window of our previous run. And there is an option here which says step over current command. So when you click on this, what it does is it basically executes your first line where your cursor was, and it stops immediately after that. So if you look here, it has launched the Facebook page, which says open the URL Facebook. And then let's go ahead and just do the simple step execution. Again, I will click on that. It is going to execute this command where it set the window size to certain value. Again, I will do a step execution. Now observe what happens here. It clicked on this email field. Do you see the cursor there? Now let's do the next step again. Again, I will do step over current command. Now the current command was it entered myuser@gmail. You can see it on the left side here. Now it will be more visible. Again, I will do a step execution. It is going to click on the password field. Now it is going to enter the password. And now the last step is it's going to click on the login button. And with this, all our commands are executed. And this is how you do the step execution. And now where is this useful? Say if you've got a very long test case written and you want at certain point you want to start doing the step execution to see where your test case is failing. Probably one of your web element you entered is wrong, or probably the text which you are entered is wrong. So for you to debug such cases, you can use this step over current command functionality. So what's our next command? Breakpoints. So there are breakpoints which you can insert in your script. Okay, so let's close this execution and let's come back to our script. So what I will do is first let's add a breakpoint. How do you add a breakpoint? Say for example, we want to add a breakpoint after we type in our email ID. So here what I do is I simply go and click here. So once you click here, this is where your breakpoint is added. Other way of adding breakpoint is you can right click on any command and you can use this toggle breakpoint. So if there is no breakpoint, it adds the breakpoint. And for you to remove it, you can simply go and select the toggle breakpoint again. So now I've added a single breakpoint. Now what you need to do is, once you execute this, once you say run test, what it will do is it will come till here, till your breakpoint. It will execute all the commands before that and it stops or pauses your execution at this point. Okay, let's go ahead and see how it does. So what I'll do is I've added a breakpoint at the click on password field and I will say execute this test. Do you see here? It says paused in the debugger. So by adding breakpoint, my test has entered the debugging mode. And where has it stopped? At the point where I added this breakpoint. So just go back here and see whether the previous steps have been executed. Yes, my previous step was adding this myuser@gmail.com into the email field, which it is done, and it is paused here. And now from here, I can either run the rest of the tests. If I just click on this run current test, what it will do is it will go ahead and execute all the steps, or even I can do a step execution from here. So say if I want to do a step execution, I'll do this. Let me minimize this window a little bit so that you can see. And I'm still again doing that step execution. So it added the password. And after this, I'll say just go ahead and complete the test. So it has clicked on your sign in login button and it is logged in. So this is how you can use the breakpoint. So that is about adding the breakpoint. Let's see what's the next. Removing the breakpoint. So I showed you. So if you want to add a breakpoint, you just click here, or you can do a right click and do toggle breakpoint. If you want to remove the breakpoint, just click again on the same place where it has added the breakpoint, or you can always do this toggle breakpoint. So this is the way of adding and removing the breakpoints. What is the third option? Disabling. Now say for example, my test case is a pretty long one. Okay, so I might have a multiple breakpoints. So say let's add one breakpoint here at the email, and then before clicking on login, let's add another breakpoint. Now when I execute this, it is going to stop here, and then again if I say continue execution, it is going to come and stop here. So let's do that first, and then I'll show you how the disable works. So let's close this window again, execute this, bring this window here. Can you see this? It's paused here. Okay, and here now you should be able to see. Now I'll say just run after this breakpoint. Do you see here? It is paused after entering the password. It has not clicked on the login button. It's paused at the click. And now I'll say again, complete the test. So your click on the login button is done and it is logged in. So it's a little bit slow. Yeah, now you got that logged in page. At some point of time while I'm debugging my test case, I would want to just disable all the breakpoints and not remove everything. For that, I have an option here which says disable breakpoint. So if this button is highlighted here, that means I have selected disable breakpoint. So what this does is when I execute this test, it ignores all these breakpoints for this run. It ignores these breakpoints until I have selected this disable breakpoint button. Okay, so let's see this. Let me close this again, and I have enabled this. Disable breakpoint is what I have selected. I'll just simply go ahead and run this test case. Do you see that? It did not stop at this breakpoint. It went ahead and completed the execution. Why? Because I have temporarily disabled it. Once I remove this selection and run it, it is again going to stop at the breakpoints. So this is how it works. So we saw adding of breakpoints, removing of breakpoints, and disabling of breakpoints. What is the next one? Enter debugger by using play to this point option. Okay. Now another way of doing this is, so let's remove all this breakpoint. Now for example, like the last time we said we want to add a breakpoint here. So now instead of doing that, what I can also do is I can just right click on that particular command and I can say play to this point only. So when I select this, what happens? It acts like a breakpoint and it comes and pauses at this particular command where I have said play till this point. So let's try to do that. So let me close this window and then for say type the password. So here, okay, I'll say right click, play to this point. So it is going to execute all the steps until the password and it will stop here. Can you see this? Paused in the debugger. So it again entered the debug mode and now it has stopped at this point. So now there are multiple options. Now every time, last time what we did a step over and also we said continue with the rest of the test. Now what we will do, we'll just stop the execution. So this is also an option available. Say if you want to change something here, you do not want to continue with your execution, you can simply go ahead and stop the execution. So we saw how do we use the play to this point option. Now debugger command. Now all these things, whatever we did now, adding the breakpoints, this was done in the IDE. There is also a way of adding a debugger programmatically. And how do we do that? Let's see. Now at the same place, say after entering the password. So here I will insert a command. In this command, I'll just say debugger. This is all the command is. Now what happens when I execute this test cases? At this point, wherever it finds this debugger command, this program enters into a debug mode and it comes and pauses the script here. Let's see this in action. So simply I'll just play the script. Let's type the email ID. Let's type the password. Okay, it is going a little slower here. Okay, and there you go. Now it is paused in debugger. So this debugger did the same job as what we did earlier with the breakpoints. Now let's go ahead and just stop the execution because let's not keep logging into Facebook with invalid username and ID. Okay, so this is how you can use the debugger command. So I will stop the execution here, close this window, and then now let's see the next one. Let's close this window. So we saw the debug, pause on exception. Okay, this is a very brilliant feature of this IDE. I'll show you how it works. Now let's say, let me remove this command now. I do not want the debugger. I'll say delete this command. Just click, let it be there. Now, if you look at this, what we are doing is we are identifying these elements like email, password, and then clicking on the login button. Now, say for example, say this click. So let's run this, then I'll show you what it is. And I want it to come and stop here. Okay, so I will execute this. All right, so now it is paused here. So now what I will do is the click, right? So this is where I'm clicking is this login button. So this login button is identified by some identifier, which is an ID. Now there is a possibility that tomorrow this particular ID might change, or any of the locator might change on this particular website. And if that happens, the first point of failure what you will see is when you click on this button, because this script will say that this element is not found. In such cases, if you are using pause on exception, that is here, pause on exception, what happens is whenever this script finds an exception, it goes and pauses at that and enters into a debug mode. Otherwise, what happens whenever you find an exception, your complete test script will stop executing because there is an error and your test case fails. Instead, since we are in a debugging mode, if you choose this option, what happens is if there is an exception, it is going to get into the debugger mode and it is going to pause the execution at that point. And once it pauses, what you can do is you can go and correct it and then continue your execution. So let's see that in action. So now, for example, the click button. So here the ID is u_0_a. So say I try to change this. Let me add 1 here. And then if I execute this, this script should fail for me basically because it is not going to find this. So can you see us trying to find this ID? And since this particular element with this ID does not exist, this whole test case should fail for me. Now, as I said earlier in this video, so if by any chance, if one of the element ID is not found, so if that is not found, it always falls back into the other locator techniques. And that is what it did in this case. It tried to locate the login button using some other ID, and that's what it says. Element found with the secondary locator. Okay, to use it by default, update the test step and to use it as a primary locator. And that is where the test case passes. So let's try to see if I can make this test case fail in any way. For that, let's remove this and let's try on the email ID. So what I will do is, let me try to comment this out. Let's remove the debugger and I will add a command here. I'll say insert new command, and in this I will say click, and then I will use the target as ID equal to email. Now in this case, I do not have a fallback ID because I am not using ID to recognize the element. Rather, I added my own command and I added my own locator here. So now let's try with this. And now instead of this is the right ID, so what I will do is I'll just change this ID to something like _1 so that this test case fails for me. Now let me close this and let's run this test case, and basically this test case should fail. So if you see here in the log, it's saying trying to find the element with ID email _1. So this ID has a default timeout, so it will keep trying to find the element until the timeout value is completed. Now there we go. So it had an implicit timeout of 30,000, so that is 30 seconds, 30,000 milliseconds, which was 30 seconds. Now after that, this test case failed. So this is the scenario we wanted. What happens here is it simply started executing. The moment it found an exception, it completely stopped. So as a tester, what you need to do is you need to go back, look for this red lines where it has failed, correct it, and then rerun the whole test. Now instead of that, what this pause on exception does is, let me click on that. So this is what is selected now. What it does is when I execute this, this is going to come and stop here. Let's see that. So let me close this and run this program again. So run current test. I'll bring this to the side. Now see, it's trying to find the ID. Since the timeout is almost 30 seconds, we need to wait until it pauses at this. So now do you see this? Now it is not exited from the test. It is just at the same step where it is unable to find this email field. Okay, and it's saying, okay, it failed with an implicit timeout of 30 seconds. But now since I'm in the debugging mode, and how did I get into the debug mode? By selecting this option, pause on exception. Now what I can do is I can go ahead and change this back to the actual one. And then from here, I can just simply do this. I can say run the test now. So now see what it did. The moment I changed that and I said run, it passed. And how did it pass? Because I gave the right ID here. And that's exactly you can do with this debugger. Control flow statements. So in the legacy IDE, these control flow statements were available as plugin. So one had to install the plugin for you to use any of these control flow statements. However, in the new IDE, these are available out of box. So let's see what these control statements are. So let's go to my notes. So there are two types of control flow statements. One is conditional branching and the other one is looping. So in conditional branching, we have a regular if, else if, nested if, else and end. And when we talk about looping, there are multiple loops available. One is the while end loop. So how does the while end loop work? The code between the while and the end is executed until the expression is true. And then we have a do repeat. So do repeat where the commands after the do will get executed first and then the condition is checked. And this is evaluated in the if statement. Times end. So you can specify a number of iterations you would like a piece of code to be executed using this loop. And then there's another loop which is a for each loop. So this provides the ability to iterate over collection objects. Like say if you have an array object with you and you want to say traverse through the array and perform certain operations on each of the array element. So that is possible using the for each loop. So let's go and write a test script and see how this works. So what I will do is I will demonstrate a use case for the if else, and then for the looping I have a few test scripts which I've already written, which I'll show you and I will walk you through them. It's a simple counter which we can use where it will be incrementing the counter using one of these loops. So we'll just see how the loops are to be used, what is the syntax to be used and how they execute in the IDE. So let's go to our IDE now. Let's minimize this. So this was our previous test case. So what I will do is I will close this project and open another project. So I have another project here which is called as control flows. So as I said, I have few scripts written for some of the loops. However, for the demo use case, we will go ahead and write a new script. Okay, so I'll say add new test. And we are going to be working with a demo site called calorie calculator. Okay, so let me name the test case itself as calorie calculator test. So let's look at what is our use case. Now in this use case, this is my use case. I'm saying go to this calorie counter website. Okay, so let's see what that website is. I have this website open here. So this is a calorie calculator website. In this website, we are saying if the gender is male, then click on the male radio button. So you have multiple fields here where you're accepting the age of a person, the gender of a person, the height, the weight, and then the activity level of the person. And when you click on calculate, this is going to give you the number of calories. So for our purpose, for our demo use case, what we will do is we will store the gender to be selected in a variable. Say for example, I want a gender female to be selected. And then I'm going to write an if condition here that if the gender is male, right? So if the gender is male, then click on the male radio button here. And then I'm saying click active from the activity dropdown. So there's a dropdown called activity here. In this, I'm going to go and select active is daily exercise or intense exercise 3 to 4 times a week. This is what I'm going to be selecting. And if the gender is female, so if the value passed from the gender is female, then what is that I want to do? I want to click on this radio button female and select very active intense exercise from this activity dropdown. A very simple use case. So this is what we are going to write in our test script. So let's minimize this window, or we can just close this window for now. We don't need this. And here, so how do we start this test case? I need to enter the URL. So for me to enter the URL, let me go to that, copy this URL, Control C, minimize this and Control V. Done. So now here I will start my recording by clicking on the start recording button. So now this URL is open. Now the first thing what I need to do is in my test script, I need to write a open command. So I'll say open and my target is what? This URL. Done. The next command is as per our use case, I want to store the gender to be selected in a variable. So we will use the store command, and when we use the store command, we need to specify the target. So let's say the target is F, and where is that I want to store? I'll create a var gender. That's my variable. So I have stored this now. What is the next thing I want to do? So once I have stored this, first is I need to put an if statement, because my use case is if the gender is male and if the gender is female. Now since by default the male is already selected here, so let's put an if condition for this condition, if the gender is female. Okay, so that is exactly what I'm going to do. So here I will say if in the command. Once I say if, in the target you need to specify the condition. Now condition is is I want to check for dollar, that's my variable, var gender. I want to check if this is equal to F. And how is that I can check? I need to use 3 equal to here. In double quotes, I'm going to mention F. Now this is what I've stored in the variable var gender. This is what I'm going to check. So if this is the condition, in the next line, now all the next lines, whatever I'm going to mention, are the ones which will be executed if this condition is true. Now in the next line, what I want is, I want to select this radio button, correct? So now what I will do, instead of writing all the commands manually, I will now use a recorder to do that. Since I'm already in the recording mode, I'll just go to the URL or the website here and I'll go click on this female. So on the right, if you see, these steps are getting recorded. And then our use case also said that from the activity drop down, we want to select very active. So now if you look here, all our steps have been recorded. So I clicked on the female radio button and then we selected the ID activity here, which is our activity drop down. And then we clicked on the desired value, which is very active. And then you end the if statement here. So, but we also want to add an else statement. So instead of saying end here, I will say else. So that means if the gender selected is male, okay, what is that we want to do? I want to go and select in the activity field as active because the male is already selected. So I'm not going to select it again. And then I will end the if loop by end statement. That is all. So this is all my script is. So let's stop the recording here. There are some mouse move, mouse up, which I really do not need. So what I will do is I'll just delete this. So this is the simple statement what I need in the else where I'm saying select. So select is something, a command which is used to select a web element, which is your drop down. So you select the drop down here, and once the drop down is clicked, and then you go ahead and click on this particular target is nothing but your active daily accesses or intents. This value from the drop down is what I'm selecting. And same thing what we did in the if statement. So let's remove these also. We don't mouse move at and mouse up at. So all these statements we don't need. So same thing, if I'm saying the if statement says if the gender is F, that is female, click on the radio button, then go to the select activity, select the activity by clicking on very active and then end the loop. So this is all our script is. Now let's go ahead and execute this and see whether it works. So let's minimize this window and I will simply say execute the current test. Let's slow down the execution speed a little bit so that you can observe what exactly is happening. Now I'll say run the current test. So the calorie calculator is open. So we are passing the value F for the gender. Correct? So that means it entered this loop. You can see here in the log. So if the gender is F, which is female, yes, it found the condition to be true. And then it clicked on this radio button. It went to the select field, which is your activity drop down. It selected the very active option from here and then it ended. Now in the same program, what I will do, instead of F, let's pass the value M. Male, and let's see what happens, and then we will go ahead and execute this program. So let's close this window again and execute the test script again. So now according to the script, we are not reselecting the radio button because this is already selected by default. And in this test script, if you see, now all the green colored one, if you see, okay, the open command ran successfully, store command ran successfully, it came to the if condition, it checked if the gender was F or M, it found that this condition is not true. So can you see here, all these other statements in the if are in black color. That means these were not executed. Instead, it came to the else part and then it executed all the commands in the else part. So this is how you use a if condition in your Selenium Ide. So let's close this. Now, as I said, there are other looping statements what we have, like while end loop or do repeat and times end. So I have a couple of examples written here. Let's walk through that and see. So let's take the while loop first. So what happens in this while loop? Let's see. In this while loop, what I'm basically doing is I have created a counter and I am counting it from 1 to 5 and then displaying the value of the counter. And I'm using a while loop for that. So here it says, first I'm setting a counter value to 1 and then I'm saying while the counter value is less than 5, this is the loop, while and end. So whatever commands are within that, those get executed until the condition is true. So this loop will get executed until the counter becomes 5. So once it sees that counter is 5, it is going to exit the loop and just print the value of the counter. It's as simple as while loop. So just pay attention to the syntax the way it has been used here. So this execute script is what a simplest statement what I have used. This could be anything. It could be any of your web elements you're performing certain operations. Say there is a calculator which you are using, say a calculator under test. So if you want to key in certain numbers until say the sum of the numbers is 30 or something. An example like that could be a valid use case for your while loop. So you could use that. So let's execute this and see how the counter works. So if I execute this command, so now take a look at the log here. It says running while test. So first statement where it assigned the counter value and then it got into the while loop and it executed the while loop until the counter was assigned the value 5, and once the counter became 5, the while loop got exited and we are printing the counter value. So this is how a while loop is used. Now similarly, the same function of using a counter, I have tried to use a do loop here. So let's look at it. Now in the do loop, what happens is the script is executed because it's the first command after the do statement. So whatever is between the do and repeat if is executed and then the condition is checked here. So here what I'm doing is I'm just first assigning a counter with value 0 and I'm incrementing the counter every time by 10. And then I have a condition that once the counter becomes 50, please exit the loop. That's all I'm doing here. And another statement what I have written here is every time the counter gets incremented, I'm printing the value of the counter. So let's execute the script. Can you see that the way it is executing it? All right, now let's see the log. Running do loop test. Okay, the counter has been initialized to 0 and then it executes the script. In this script is doing what? It is just incrementing the counter by 10. The counter becomes 10 and then 20, 30, 40 and 50. So as soon as it becomes 50, it's going to exit the loop and print the value of the counter. So one thing to notice is there is no web element or website testing which I'm doing from the script. However, one thing what the IDE needs is it needs a starting point. So whenever you create a new test kit, it asks you to at least give it a URL from where it can start. Though it is not going to launch that URL, it is going to launch your browser definitely before even it executes a single line of test. So that is something mandatory in the IDE. So we saw do loop, we saw the while loop. There's also something called as times loop. So which is what I have said here. Times and end. So this is something you can specify a number of iterations you would like to perform a set of commands. So now in this example, what am I doing? I'm simply incrementing a counter by 1, right? And I'm saying just increment, that is, this is the only command which I want to execute, but I want it to execute 2 times. That's all. So there is no other conditions here. It is simply saying there is a set of command or a single command which I want to execute it twice. And the number of times which I want to execute is what I mentioned here in the target. So first initially I am assigning a counter with value 100 and then I'm saying increment this counter by 1 2 times and then print the value of the counter. So let's execute this and then change the number of times. So if I say run test here, so can you see this? The number of times it got iterated and now the value is 102. Why? Because initial value was 100. In the loop, which is the times loop, I'm saying the iterations is 2 times, execute the command which increments the counter by 1. So that is why your counter value becomes 102. Now say I increase this to say 10 so that we get a feel of how the loop executes here, and same thing I will execute it. Now see it, you can visually see the number of times the loop is getting executed. Alright, and in the log you can see the values also here. Okay, can you see here? So this loop executed 10 times and hence the counter value becomes 110. So these are a simple ways of using these loops in the IDE. So you can implement these loops for any kind of functionality you may want to perform on your web elements or any logic which you want to build for your test cases. Selenium Side Runner. Selenium Side Runner is a command line runner tool which allows the user to run your Selenium Ide test cases on any browsers or to run the test cases parallelly, and also it gives you a mechanism to use the grid setup to run your test cases on a remote machine. Okay, so for us to work with this Selenium Side Runner, there are certain installations which we need to do. And some of the installation prereqs are, one is you need a Node.js server. And what is this Node.js server? Node.js server is a powerful JavaScript based platform. And this is the platform which is intensively used by many developers across the world for developing their web applications. And it's an open source and it is available free of cost to everyone to use it. So we will need to go ahead and install a Node.js server for this. So now let's look at all the installation steps which are involved in installing the side runner and running it. Okay, So let's go to my notes. So the seleniumhq.org has a complete documentation on how to install this command line runner, how to use it, and what are the different ways we can use this runner. I'll just show you where it is. And you can use this as a reference for any of the tests which you're creating and using the side runner to run it. So let me open a new window here. Let's go to this website. So if you see here, it has a complete guide on how to use this command line runner, right? Including the setups, what is the prereqs, installing the browser drivers, and how do you do the different configurations which are available with the side runner. So you can configure various browsers with that. You can set different capabilities for the browser. If you want to use the Selenium grid to run your test cases on remote servers, it also gives you complete details on how to do that. And also using the parameters, changing your base URL. So this is a complete guide which you can refer to when you're working with the side runner. Okay, so let's go back to our installation. So coming back to our installation here. So the first prereq what we need for the Selenium side runner to run is your Node.js. Okay, so if you go to this website nodejs.org, let me open the same browser. Okay, all right. So here you will see that the Node.js is available as an installable for all the platforms. Like you have a Windows installer, you have Mac OS installer, you have Linux installers also. So if you're working with the Windows machine, there are two options for you. Either you can go ahead and download the MSI installer, or you can just download the zip and unzip it into any folder on your system. Okay. And since I'm using Mac machine, what I have done is I have downloaded this version, PKG version, and have installed it on my machine. Okay. So once you download, say if you're working on the Windows machine, so say if 64-bit is what you require, and you click here and download the zip package, I'll show you how the folder structure looks like. So this is where I have downloaded the Node.js installable. Now, if you look at the Windows one, so this is what happens when you download the zip file and unzip it. This is the folder structure it creates, and this is what we would need, right? So npm is something which we would be using to install all the packages which are required on this Node.js server. And I'll explain to you what those packages are, okay? So once you do this installation, you need to go and check if your installation is gone properly or not. So for that, what you do is go to your terminal window, or in your case, if you're using a Windows machine, just open a command prompt, right? And then you have to just give this command here. You say npm -v, which is basically saying what is the version of the Node.js which we have installed, which is 6.9. Okay, now what is this npm? Npm is nothing but it's a Node.js package manager, and it gets installed with your node. And this is used to install all your other packages, or what it is called as modules, on your system. Okay, so now with this, we know that our npm has been installed properly. So let's move to the next step of installation. So now we have our Node.js installed. Now next thing is to install the Selenium side runner. Now the Selenium side runner is a library which is available to us, and we need to install this library using the npm. So let me go back to my terminal again. So I'll just show you the command what it is, what we use for installing this package or the library. And since I've already installed on my machine, I will not be doing the installation here. So what you need to do is, so if you are a Windows user, you can directly give the command as npm install -g Selenium side runner. Okay, so this is the command which you need to give. However, if you're a Mac user or a Unix user, since you need to use a root user here, what you need to do is just say sudo. Once you press enter here, it will go ahead and install this complete library on your system. Now, since I've already installed, I'm not going to do that. Okay, so I'll just exit from this. Now, once the installation is done, how do you check whether your installation has gone correctly or not? You have to just simply give a command like selenium side runner -version. Okay, and now this will give you the version number if the installation has been successful. So right now the version installed, which is the latest version, is 3.11. Okay, so far we have done the installation of the Node.js server. We have done the installation of the Selenium. Now, while you also do this installation, you need to know that where is the Selenium Ide side runner has been installed, right? As I said, it's a library, or what you popularly call as module, in your npm. Right? So for you to check where it has got installed, you simply need to go to the directory. I'll say ls-user local library. So if you see here, you'll see something called as node modules. So whatever packages you're going to install using npm would get installed in this directory, the node modules directory. So let's go ahead and see whether I have my Selenium side runner there or not. So I'll just use the same ls/node modules. Okay, do you see this? Selenium side runner is what has got installed. And previously to that, when we installed the Node.js server, it also installed this npm, right? So that is also available under the same folder. So far so good. So we have our Selenium Ide installed now. Now what else is required? So we installed the Node.js, we installed the Selenium side runner. Now we need this browser drivers. Now what are these browser drivers? Now what you did using your IDE was, in IDE was, we said, right in the IDE itself, I said run the current test. And since I'm using Firefox browser here, any test case using the IDE plugin on your Firefox you execute is going to execute on the Firefox browser. Correct? Same way, if you're using the Selenium IDE on Chrome, which is an extension on Chrome, and you run the test cases there, it is going to use the Chrome browser to run the test case. However, any test cases or any automation scripts you're going to write, you want your scripts to run on all the browsers because you want to do a cross-browser testing, right? So for that purpose, what we do through command line is we install this browser drivers, right? So say if you want to run your test cases on Edge browser, so that means you first need to install your Edge browse driver on your systems before you run your test case on Edge browser. If you want to do it for Chrome, similarly you need to download the Chrome Web Driver and install it. For Firefox, the same. And once you install that, then you should be able to run it on any browser. Now where are these Chrome browsers available? So if you go to the seleniumhq.org, let me show you that. Okay, in the Selenium HQ website, if you go to this download tab, right, and if you go down here, you will see something called as third-party drivers, bindings and plugins. And here you have a list of all the browsers and its corresponding driver files which are available. And this is what which you need to go and download. For example, say I want to run all my tests on Chrome browser, right? So what I do is I click here, okay, in the download section, go to the latest Chrome driver available, click on that. And then depending on which OS you're working on, if you're working on Mac, just download this. If you're working on Windows, you download this. And once you download the driver, what you need to do is you keep that drivers, like for example, can you see this driver file? So this is my driver file. This is my executable driver file. So what I did was I just downloaded this file for Mac and I copied it to the location where my tests are present. Okay, now, so once I have this available, what I need to do is I need to install this driver using again the npm command. Okay, and to install this driver, what you need to do is you need to be in the same directory where your driver file is present. Okay, in the same directory, you just issue this command. You say npm install -g and your Chrome driver. This is it. So once you install this driver, you should be able to work with your Chrome driver. Got it? Very simple. So similarly, if you're working with different browsers, say if you also want to run your test cases with Edge or Internet Explorer or the Firefox browser, same way you need to download all the drivers from this location. So from here, like you have Edge browser, your Opera browser, you have a Mozilla Firefox browser. So any of the browser which you want to work with, you have to just download your driver from here, place it in this location and install it using npm command. Okay, so since I will not be executing this command again because I've already installed it. So once your drivers are installed, what's the next step? We are ready to execute our test cases. Okay, so these are all the installation steps which are required to get your command line runner, which is called as Selenium side runner, ready for you to execute your test from the command line. All right. Okay, now let's go ahead and see how do we execute the test cases. So let's go back to our previous example in this video where we wrote some of the test cases for testing our control flows. Okay, so these are all the test cases. Now, if you observe here, I have not created any test suite here. We just had a default suite which was created when we created the project, and we just went ahead and created all the tests here. For the side runner to run, we need to have a test suite there. So if I just try to run the test suite, let's try to run this. What is the name of this project? Control flows. So I'll show you what happens if there is no test suite defined for this. So let me clear the screen and which is our project here? This one. Okay, so what I will do is let me simply go ahead and execute this project. So to execute any test, this is the command which you use. You simply call Selenium side runner and the project name. Okay, and also once you have installed the Selenium side runner, you can also check the version of it. Okay, so let's execute this. Selenium side runner and the project name. Project name is this. Done. So now if I press enter, now see what happens. Okay, it's saying running the default suite. Can you see here? It looks for a test suite to start its execution. Okay, so it picked up the default suite, which is here. Okay, since it was created when we created this new project, fine. However, it's a test suite failed to run. Why? Because your test suite must contain at least one test, and all our tests are residing outside the test suite. We have none in the default test suite, correct? So what we will do, let's go ahead and create this test suite. Instead of default, what I will do is I'll say first rename this. So let's give it a proper name. So we'll say control flow test suite. Okay, done. So I have renamed it. Now let's go ahead and add all those test cases which we have created to this. So I'll just simply say add test and select all these tests. So we have around 4 tests here. So I'll just select all them. Done. So I'll save this project. I'll go to my folder IDE tests and the same file name. I'll just say replace. Now we have a test suite called control flow test. Now let's go ahead and run that again. Now let's see what happens. Okay, so there are multiple test cases here. So let's see, all these test cases will be run one after the other sequential. So we have that calorie counter test case, and then we have the loop test cases. All right, so it is done. So now let's understand the flow of this test case. Okay, so this is where we started running our test suite. So it finished first test case, it finished the second test case, it finished the third test case, and then the fourth test case. So all the 4 test cases it has completed. And it says all the 4 passed, total 4, and it also shows you the total time taken for the complete test suite to run. And for every test case, what is the amount of time required to execute the test. So this is all the information which is available here. If at all there is a failure in any of the test case, that would get reflected here. It would say 4 passed, 1 failed, and total 4 executed. Okay, so this is the kind of report what you will get to see. Good so far? Okay, so let's go back to our notes and see whether we have done everything. So the other way of running is, say you have multiple browser drivers installed and you want to run this on a particular browser. So during that time, what you can do is you can use this command. You can say Selenium side runner -c. -c is nothing but setting the capabilities. Capabilities for what? For the browser. And then you give a browser name here. So you can say Chrome or you can say Firefox, whatever the browser of your choice. And then give your project name. So with this, what happens is if your browser is installed, now you have to install the browser using this command, correct? So if your browser is installed, it will execute this particular test suite on the browser which you have mentioned here, right? And that is how you use this Selenium side runner to run your test cases on multiple browsers. Now simply what you can do is you can create a shell script or a batch script. You can add this line into a batch script for the multiple browsers and you can execute this. So that way all your test cases would execute it on all the browsers. So that way you can achieve your cross-browser testing. So other thing, if you remember, I also said that command line runner, like if you go back to our presentation, it says we can run it for parallel testing. Now let's see how do we achieve this parallel testing. Now to achieve this parallel testing, there are certain steps which you need to do in the IDE. So let's go back to our test suite. So we have this test suite. So if you go here and go to the settings, can you see this run in parallel? So you need to check this checkbox to run all these test cases in parallel. So right now what happened when we executed it, all the test cases ran sequentially one after the other, correct? So for every test case, there was a Chrome browser launched and the Chrome browser was closed before the next test was launched. Now let's try to do this. I'm going to check this checkbox where it says run in parallel and I'll say submit. I'll save this project again. Now same thing, I'll overwrite this project, save, done, replace. Now let's go to our terminal window and run this test cases again. So for that, what I will do, I'll call the same command again. However, now please observe the number of Chrome browser windows it's going to open. Okay, I'll show you that. So it has started running the test suite. Okay, can you see this? 3 Chrome browser windows open at the same time. Okay, and one by one they're going to get closed out. Okay, so there was also the 4th one open, but since the test case was so small that it was too quick for us to see here. Now look at the complete execution here. So what it has done is it opened all the browsers in parallel, okay, and it ran all the test cases parallelly. You will see a big difference, and since these are very small test cases, you might not be able to see a big difference in the execution time. However, if you have got a bigger test cases which you are running, you will see a remarkable difference in the time taken by the suite to run the test cases. Still here you can see, okay, it's almost 11 seconds it took, whereas in the previous example, it took 13 seconds. As I said, the difference is very small because our test cases are very, very minute test cases, right? If you have a bigger test cases where it launches the browser, launches your application under test, then you're doing multiple operations, you'll be able to see a remarkable difference when you run the test sequentially and when you run it parallelly. Okay? So this is how you work with the IDE, and this is how you achieve the parallel execution. Okay, so that completes our Selenium side runner. Now let's look at some of the limitations of the Selenium IDE. The first limitation is you cannot export your IDE scripts to WebDriver scripts. The support is yet to be added, right? So earlier in this video, I showed you there are ways to export the scripts to JUnit and Python. However, the previous IDE did have this capability of exporting your scripts to WebDriver scripts, and that support is yet to be added to the new IDE. Data-driven testing, like using Excel files or reading data from the CSV files and passing it to your scripts. So this capability is not yet available in the IDE. So you cannot do data-driven testing. Database testing is also not possible. So you cannot actually connect your database, read the test data from your database, or even you cannot perform any kind of database testing. Reporting facility. So it does not have a good reporting. We saw when we use the command line runner or through the IDE when we run the test, there's a very minimal reporting capabilities what we could see. So it does not really have capabilities of reporting like your test engine or the report engine. All right. So to sum it up, what all we learn in this video? We learned how to use the Selenium IDE to create automation scripts. We also looked at some of the key features of this new IDE, like the reusability of the tests, using the control flow statements, how do we use the debugger, and most importantly, using the command line runner, which is called a side runner, to run your tests on any browser and also to run test case parallelly. So this brings us to the end of this video. So hope you had a good learning with this video, and thank you very much.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.